There is a moment at the end of every game when the noise collapses into a strange kind of silence. It is not real silence because the crowd is still filing out. The vendors are still shouting, and the players are still breathing hard as they walk toward the tunnel. But there is a silence inside the mind, a hollow space that appears after the roar dissolves. It is in that quiet where truth usually hides. I have learned to pay attention to it, because it is the moment when the difference between what really happened and what the world thinks happened begins to grow. That difference is not born on the field. It is born in the small gap between reality and broadcast. A gap measured in seconds, but capable of shaping legacies. Fans believe they watch football live. They believe they see the raw moment exactly as it unfolded. They cheer as if their voices reach the players instantly. They react as if their emotions are connected to the field in real time. But nothing they see is truly live. Everything they witness has already passed before it reaches their screens. The story they absorb is always a few seconds behind the truth. In those seconds, a subtle transformation occurs. The event is no longer a moment. 'Tis a product. A filtered version of history. A version shaped by decisions made far from the line of scrimmage. I have watched players step onto the field with clear eyes and steady hearts, unaware that the moment awaiting them would become part of their final season in ways they could never predict. The final season is not always the one announced at a press conference. It is often the one that begins without warning and ends with the realization that the player who entered the stadium was not the same man who walked out. Sometimes it is because of injury. Sometimes it is because of disappointment or disillusionment. And sometimes it is because the world saw something on a delayed broadcast that forever redefined who they were. I think about the player who collapsed without warning. On the field, the air changed. You could feel an entire roster hold its breath. Coaches signaled to the sideline. Players stepped back in confusion and dread. But in living rooms across the country, the moment arrived with a brief delay, softened by commentary, trimmed by uncertainty, shaped by the network's decision about what should be seen and what should be withheld. While teammates circled around their fallen brother, the audience received a curated version of shock. The timing created a different emotional arc. For the players, the collapse was raw and immediate. For the audience, it came in a form that fit the rhythm of television. The difference created two realities. One lived by those who were present, and one lived by those who believed they were watching live. Then there was the fight. Tempers flared, bodies collided, and a single shove ignited chaos. On the field, the spark was clear. It came from frustration and pressure and the physical toll of a long season. But the broadcast trimmed the lead-up and kept the moment that appeared most dramatic. Millions saw only a fragment. The story became one of aggression, not context. Careers are fragile when reduced to isolated moments. The player at the center of that incident carried the weight of a narrative shaped not by truth, but by the decisions made in a production truck. The fight itself lasted only seconds. Its consequences lasted much longer. And then there is the moment that looks intentional from the perfect broadcast angle. I think about one particular game where a defensive player lunged toward a quarterback, barely brushing his helmet. On the field, it felt like an accident. It happened in full speed, instinct against instinct, muscle memory against muscle memory. But on the delayed broadcast, slowed just enough. The contact took on a different meaning. What felt accidental in real time looked deliberate once processed and replayed. Fans responded with outrage. Analysts filled the gap between perception and reality with strong opinions. The player found himself labeled as reckless, even though he never intended to harm anyone. A career can pivot in that small space between the moment and the broadcast. It is the space where stories are born and reputations are reshaped. The more I watched these patterns unfold, the more I realized how much power hides in a few seconds of delay. It is a silent presence that decides what the world will see and what it will never know. It is the unseen editor of emotion. It does not invent events, but it defines them. It controls timing, framing, and sequence. It decides when the nation gasps and when it looks away. It influences judgment long before anyone has time to breathe or reflect. I began to ask myself questions that would not go away. What is a live moment when millions see it only after someone else has already chosen how to present it? How much of what fans believe about players is shaped by timing rather than truth? How many reputations were altered because a single angle, chosen within those few seconds, presented a story that did not match what the players themselves experienced? How many careers were quietly redirected when a nation saw an incident after it had been packaged for them? How many men carried the weight of judgments formed not by reality, but by perception created in delay? I think about the players who walked off the field after the final game of their season, unaware that the few seconds between the moment and the broadcast would define their legacy more than any statistic. I think about rookies who entered the league with hope and veterans who tried to protect their reputations, all of them vulnerable to the simple truth that perception travels farther than reality. In football, careers can hinge on fractions of inches and fractions of seconds. In the world of broadcasting, legacies can hinge on a 3-second delay. As the seasons went by, I became more aware of the divide between the truth experienced on the field and the truth consumed by the world. I realized that every moment of football is a negotiation between reality and presentation. The players live the raw version. The audience receives the edited version. In the middle, hidden behind the curtain of technology, the delay transforms events into narratives. It is subtle but powerful. It shapes opinion. It shapes emotion. It shapes the arc of memory. This story is about that hidden space. It is about how a few seconds have quietly influenced decades of public judgment. It is about the unseen force that filtered the violence, softened the chaos, amplified the drama, and changed the way fans interpret the game they love. It is about the difference between what truly happened and what the world believes happened. It is about the silent architect of perception that has been present in every game for generations. This is the world behind the broadcast curtain. This is the story of how delay rewrote the emotional language of football. When I look back through the long and complicated history of the NFL on television, I see a trail of moments that were never experienced the way people believe they were. The concept of a broadcast delay seems simple on the surface, a small buffer of time inserted between the action and the viewer. Yet the deeper I explored its origins, the more I realized that those few seconds shaped entire eras of football. They influenced how fans processed violence, how they reacted to human tragedy, and how they judged the men who played the game. The broadcast delay did not begin as a storytelling tool, but it quietly became one. It grew from a technical precaution into a mechanism that shaped narrative, protected reputations, softened scandal, and sometimes turned players into symbols of controversy before they even knew what had happened. The first seeds of the delay were planted in the early 1970s, when live sports on television were expanding quickly and audiences were experiencing games with a sense of immediacy that had never existed before. For the first time, millions could watch in near real time as collisions, tempers, and unpredictable human behavior collided on the field. Networks feared that profanity, escalating fights, or sudden injuries would slip past them and reach the public without warning. Technology at the time was limited, but engineers crafted a few seconds of buffer to protect the airwaves. It was marketed as a safeguard. It was portrayed as a simple, responsible way to ensure that families at home did not witness moments considered inappropriate for national audiences. Yet even in those first years, the delay began to influence decisions about what should be shown and what should be trimmed away. By the 1990s, technology had advanced, and the NFL had become a colossal entertainment force. Television partners were investing massive sums to secure broadcasting rights, and the league understood that perception had become as valuable as performance. The delay was no longer just a barrier against unexpected outbursts. It became a tool that networks used more deliberately. They could suppress replays that appeared too violent. They could soften the camera's attention when a player suffered a significant injury. They could shift away from scenes that threatened the tone of the broadcast. They could select the angle that felt most suitable for shaping public interpretation. These decisions were subtle, but they carried weight. Every choice altered how millions understood the moment. By the time the modern era arrived, the broadcast delay had evolved into something far more complex. It protected the league's image. It shielded its partners from live controversy. It offered time for producers and executives to decide which version of the truth would be presented to the world. Every second mattered. Every choice had consequences. The delay had become a narrative device. It did not simply protect the audience. It shaped the emotional framework that the audience would absorb. I began to understand the true power of the delay when I revisited documented controversies and compared them to the way they were broadcast. I studied the reactions of players who believed that the world would see the moment exactly as it unfolded. I listened to broadcast engineers who admitted privately that certain incidents were trimmed or reframed to avoid inflaming public reaction. I read statements from media directors who acknowledged that the delay existed not only to protect viewers, but also to protect the brand. These were not accusations. They were reflections from professionals who had lived inside the system and understood its unwritten rules. I remember one engineer who told a reporter years ago that he learned to monitor the sideline more closely than the ball. He knew that unpredictable reactions, heated confrontations, or medical emergencies required instant judgment. He once said that the responsibility felt heavier than anyone realized, because in the space of a few seconds, he had to decide whether the country should witness a moment or be shielded from it. Former players have spoken quietly about incidents where they felt misrepresented because the sequence shown at home was not the sequence they lived. They felt their actions were taken out of context. They believed that a single cut in the broadcast changed the meaning entirely. There were known moments where the delay prevented real-time reactions from reaching the public. A serious injury that left a stadium in eerie silence might be softened at home with commentary that steadied the mood. A confrontation between teammates might be cut short to avoid speculation. A coach's emotional outburst might be shortened to protect professional image. Fans believed they had seen the full truth. They believed they had reacted to the same moment as everyone else, but in reality, they reacted to the version that survived the delay. That version became the official memory. That version became history. As I examined more cases, I understood that the broadcast delay shaped reputations in ways that were rarely acknowledged. It influenced scandals by altering their emotional timing. It softened others by reducing exposure. It affected fan psychology by controlling the rhythm of shock, anger, sympathy, or disbelief. It transformed the pace of controversy. It changed when fans felt outrage and when they felt relief. The delay created a new kind of storytelling, one where truth and perception drifted apart without anyone noticing. This documentary will explore that divide. It will trace the evolution of broadcast delay from the early days of primitive technology to the sophisticated systems that operate today. It will examine how the delay shaped reputations, influenced narratives, and affected the careers of players who never understood why the public viewed them differently than the people in the stadium. It will show how scandals often unfolded differently for those who lived them compared to those who watched them. It will examine the emotional consequences of seeing violent collisions through a filter of time. It will analyze how fans formed judgments based not on reality, but on an edited version of reality that arrived in their homes seconds later. The journey forward will reveal the delay as a shield that protected the league during moments of crisis. It will explore the delay as a weapon when certain angles intensified outrage. It will expose the delay as a filter that softened the brutality of the sport when necessary. It will highlight the delay as a protector of league narratives during times when the truth threatened to outpace control. Most importantly, It will show how the delay created a divide between truth and perception that changed the way football has been interpreted for generations. As we move through the upcoming chapters, we will examine stories that illuminate the hidden power of those seconds. We will revisit key turning points in sports broadcasting. We will explore the tension between authenticity and presentation. We will look at the gap between what is lived on the field and what is remembered by the public. The broadcast delay is more than a technological feature. It is a force that shaped emotional memory and influenced the cultural understanding of the NFL. It is a quiet architect of perception. The modern world of real-time social media challenges that system. Fans inside the stadium can upload moments that bypass the delay entirely. They can show what television chose not to show. They can challenge the official narrative. They can force the league to confront the difference between what was filtered and what actually happened. The conflict between delayed broadcast and real-time digital truth is the new frontier of sports perception. It is a collision of old methods and new expectations. It reveals how fragile the illusion of live viewing truly is. This is the story of how seconds built narratives. This is the story of how the gap between truth and perception changed the emotional landscape of football. This is the story of how broadcast delays shaped the way a nation watched its most powerful sport. I often think about those early days of televised football when the game was still finding its voice in the living rooms of America. There was a rawness to it, a kind of unfiltered energy that belonged to stadiums long before it belonged to screens. The cameras were bulky, slow, and easily overwhelmed by motion. The microphones picked up more than they were meant to, catching stray language and sideline chaos that had never been intended for public ears. The broadcast trucks were cramped, overheated spaces where directors shouted last-second decisions over static, trying to shape a story out of a sport that unfolded faster than anyone could narrate it. That era was the birthplace of a tension that would soon define the relationship between the league and the people watching at home. It was the moment when football stopped being merely played and started being carefully presented. In the 70s, when television reached deeper into American life, the NFL realized it was showing more than athletic competition. It was showing emotion, aggression, frustration, and the impulsive reactions that came with a violent game. And as the audience grew, so did the fear. Parents watching with children complained about profanity that slipped through. Fans complained about seeing injured players in close-up before trainers could even reach them. Broadcasters worried about fights erupting inches from the cameras and what might spill through the speakers before anyone could react. All of this created a cultural anxiety that had not existed in radio or print. Television was immediate. It transported living moments directly into homes. And that immediacy frightened people who were responsible for protecting the league's image. What emerged from those concerns was the idea that maybe live television should not be entirely live. Maybe the nation watching at home needed a buffer, something that could shield them from the unscripted volatility of the sidelines and the brutality of collisions. That was how the first broadcast delay was born. Only a few seconds at first. A small cushion of time designed to catch a curse word or an unexpected confrontation. But those seconds were enough to change the way the sport appeared to millions. The delay was not presented as censorship. It was described as prudence. But once it was in place, it began to shape perception in ways no one had fully anticipated. Those early delays were clumsy at first. Engineers had to build systems that recorded a moment, held it, and then released it a heartbeat later. The earliest versions used analog tape that looped constantly, almost like the reels used in radio but modified for video. They were experimental machines run by technicians who sometimes did not even fully understand the physics behind what they were operating. These delays could fail without warning, either collapsing into true live feed or stretching the gap longer than intended. But even with their imperfections, they ushered in a new era. For the first time, someone other than the viewer controlled when a moment was witnessed. Someone decided whether the public saw a punch thrown in full or only in a trimmed replay. Someone could mute a ranting coach or cut away from a player shouting in pain. All of this happened in seconds, yet those seconds became the space where football began to be filtered. Looking back, I can see how those decisions shaped the sport's public identity. Football looked cleaner. It looked more orderly. The chaos that defined the game on the field did not always reach the broadcast. The violence felt more structured because the delay allowed editors to remove its least palatable edges. The audience developed an image of football that was powerful but not unhinged, aggressive but not uncontrolled. It was a version of reality that maintained the excitement of the sport while softening its emotional extremes. And because fans believed they were watching live, they never questioned that softening. They trusted the immediacy, unaware that the immediacy itself had been engineered. As the broadcast delay became standard, its effects began to ripple through culture. Viewers became accustomed to a sanitized version of sideline exchanges. They never heard most of the profanity that erupted during a game. They never saw the swings that did not escalate into full fights. They rarely witnessed the moments of panic when a player went down and teammates signaled frantically for help. Those things still happened on the field, but they disappeared before they reached the audience. Over time, the public began to believe that players were more composed than they actually were. Coaches seemed calmer. Sports seemed more controlled. The delay had gently sculpted not only what people saw, but what they believed football was. The league understood this shaping power. It recognized that the broadcast delay was not simply a technical safeguard, but a tool that allowed it to decide what kind of sport the nation would perceive. It could protect the brand from the rawest edges of competition. It could prevent small incidents from becoming national scandals. It could save players from reputational wounds that would have been inflicted by unfiltered television. And while none of this was openly discussed, it became an unspoken pact between the league and its broadcast partners. Everyone understood the value of those seconds. They were a shield that kept the sport appealing, dramatic, and palatable to an ever-expanding audience. But every shield has another side. The delay did not only protect, it also concealed. It allowed networks to downplay certain moments and amplify others. It gave editors time to choose the angles that told the best story, not necessarily the truest one. A minor scuffle could be cut away from entirely, making it disappear as if it never happened. A controversial hit could be replayed instantly from a particular camera that made it look deliberate, even if players on the field saw it differently. The delay created an illusion of impartial broadcasting while quietly allowing selective framing. And as audiences trusted what they saw, the power of that framing grew. In those early decades, few fans wondered whether they were seeing the whole truth. Most viewers believed the broadcast was a window into the field. They believed the announcers were reacting in real time to the same events they were witnessing. They did not realize that directors were choosing between camera feeds with the safety of the delay. That safety made it possible to hide moments of chaos at the edges of the field, moments that might have told a different story about the game. The delay shaped public identity not through deception, but through omission. And omission can be just as powerful as any narrative. The first generation of players who became televised stars were shaped by this new system. Some benefited. Their tempers were softened by the protective gap. Their worst outbursts never reached the audience. Others were harmed because certain moments slipped through or were replayed in ways that made them appear reckless or malicious. A hit that felt accidental on the field could look intentional on screen when slowed down or shown from an angle chosen during those few seconds of delay. Reputations began to diverge from the experiences of those who lived the moments in real time. What started as a small technical buffer to prevent profanity became something far more significant. It created a divide between the world the players inhabited and the world the audience believed they were watching. That divide would grow as technology advanced, but its seed was planted in those early broadcast booths. Among the engineers who experimented with tape loops and the directors who realized they could shape perception while still maintaining the illusion of immediacy. The birth of the broadcast delay was the birth of a new kind of storytelling, one in which the game was no longer entirely spontaneous. It was framed, curated, and delivered through a system designed to protect the sport while also controlling it. I look back on that beginning and see something both ingenious and unsettling. The league needed protection. The audience needed boundaries. But hidden within those boundaries was the potential to rewrite the emotional truth of the game. Those first few seconds of delay became a crack in the wall, separating real-time experience from televised experience. In that crack, perception began to take shape. Not as the players lived it, but as others decided it should appear. And once that gap existed, it would only grow. I have spent years studying how the NFL built its public identity, and the more I look back, the clearer it becomes that the league never left something as important as reputation to chance. It understood that football, in its truest form, was unpredictable. It was emotional. It was physical in ways that bordered on violent. And it was capable of creating moments that could damage the image of a league trying to present itself not just as entertainment, but as a cornerstone of American culture. That is why the broadcast delay, originally created as a safeguard, evolved into something far more deliberate. It became one of the league's most trusted tools for protecting what executives often called the shield. The shield was more than a logo. It was the embodiment of stability, tradition, and authority. The NFL wanted every broadcast to reinforce that image. The games were meant to feel intense but controlled, fierce but dignified, dramatic but never chaotic. The broadcast delay made it possible to maintain that balance, even when reality did not cooperate. Those few seconds gave production teams the power to reshape a moment before the public ever saw it. And once the league recognized that potential, it treated the delay as a critical part of its reputation management strategy. In the 80s and 90s, when the NFL was expanding into a global brand, the stakes grew even higher. Television had become the primary connection between the game and its audience. Tens of millions watched every week, forming their understanding of the sport through the images and sounds that broadcasters chose to deliver. Sponsors invested enormous sums on the belief that the NFL would maintain a polished, respectable presence. The league could not afford a single moment of unfiltered chaos to undermine that trust. So the broadcast delay was quietly strengthened. Technologies improved. Review rooms expanded. More people were given the authority to intervene at the precise moment something unscripted threatened the tone the league needed to uphold. I think often about the hidden responsibilities that fell on broadcast directors. They sat in front of walls of screens, each showing a different angle of the field, each revealing a slightly different truth. When something unexpected happened, they had seconds to decide which version of that truth would reach the public. It was an extraordinary amount of power, and it was power backed by the expectation that the league's image would always come first. If a player erupted in frustration, the delay allowed the broadcast to cut to a distant shot or a shot of the crowd. If a coach shouted something that would have sparked controversy, the audio could be quieted before reaching the audience. If two players clashed in a way that hinted at something more serious, the director could shift the focus to a replay of the previous down, creating the illusion that nothing unusual had happened. One of the earliest examples I encountered involved a sideline confrontation in the mid-80s. A star player had been benched during a crucial game, and in his frustration, he shoved his position coach hard enough to send him stumbling. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. Both men were shouting. Teammates rushed in to separate them. And in the chaotic seconds that followed, the broadcast delay became the difference between scandal and silence. The director cut to a wide crowd shot, muted the sideline microphones, and returned to the action with a calm explanation that the player appeared frustrated but composed. The public never saw the shove. The league avoided a controversy that would have dominated headlines. And the player, whose reputation could have changed overnight, finished the season without the shadow of that moment defining him. Another example took place in the early days of high-definition broadcasts, when cameras captured detail in ways the league had not previously experienced. It was not an attack, but it was reckless enough to raise alarms. That was not because those things were always true, but because the delay ensured that moments contradicting those beliefs rarely reached them. As a result, public expectations shifted. Fans began to expect emotional restraint. They began to judge players based on an image shaped by editors rather than by the raw reality of the field. When an incident did slip through the delay, it often triggered far stronger reactions because it broke the illusion of control that viewers had grown accustomed to. One such incident took place when a player uttered a profanity after a missed assignment. Commentators felt compelled to address it in the following days. That moment made it clear how deeply filtered broadcasts had shaped public expectation. Fans were no longer prepared for reality. They were prepared for the sanitized version that the delay had created. There were also more uncomfortable examples of protection. Moments when the delay was used to minimize the severity of on-field injuries. When a player went down in a way that shocked teammates, early reactions could look frantic, even terrified. Those reactions were often cut away from to maintain calm for viewers. The league insisted that families should not see panic in the moments before medical staff arrived. That rationale carried empathy, yet it also served the league by reducing the emotional weight of dangerous plays. With the delay, the most alarming seconds disappeared. Fans saw players treated professionally and efficiently. They did not see the fear in teammates' eyes. The shield stayed polished. The broadcast delay also shaped public discourse around rule changes. When a violent collision occurred, early reactions from players could reveal genuine concern or anger. But if those emotions contradicted the league's narrative about safety, they were often trimmed. What reached the public was a replay that could be framed analytically rather than emotionally. Analysts would break down the mechanics of the hit while ignoring the tension on the sideline. Over time, this created a disconnect between the way players experienced the game's dangers and the way fans interpreted them. The delay filtered out the urgency that might have pressured the league to act faster on certain safety issues. In every era, the league insisted that the delay existed for quality control and public comfort. And those reasons were always partially true. But beneath them was a deeper purpose. The delay maintained the authority of the shield. It preserved the illusion that the league maintained control, even in the most volatile moments. It allowed executives to protect players, protect sponsors, and protect the narrative that football was an orderly spectacle rather than a chaotic collision of human emotion and physical risk. As I reflect on all these examples, I understand why the league fought to maintain the delay, even as technology made true live broadcasting easier. Those few seconds became a foundation of the NFL's public identity. They allowed uncomfortable truths to be softened. They allowed reputations to be protected. They allowed the sport to appear cleaner than it was. And once the public accepted that softened version as reality, the shield became stronger than ever. One is the lens of the fan who grew up believing I was seeing everything exactly as it happened. Once you understand how broadcast delay works, you start to realize that the NFL possesses a rare kind of power. Slowly, I began to realize that the delay was not just preventing certain moments from reaching the air. It was erasing them before the public ever knew they existed. One of the first incidents that opened my eyes involved a young wide receiver who had just been benched after a costly mental mistake. When he came off the field, he threw his helmet with enough force to crack a plastic equipment case. He was shouting at his position coach. He was barely held back by teammates. The stadium saw it. The cameras caught it. But the audience at home saw a shot of the quarterback reviewing plays on a tablet. Those furious seconds were removed before they had the chance to exist in the public record. When reporters later asked the coach about the exchange, he simply said that the player was frustrated but composed. The truth was something else entirely. Yet the only truth that reached the public was the calm explanation. The meltdown had been erased. There were moments even more unsettling. Injuries that shook players to their core. Injuries that revealed the fragility of a sport built on strength. I remember a game when a linebacker collapsed after a routine tackle. His body was still. His teammates were frantic. They waved desperately for medical staff. Some players prayed. Others backed away with fear on their faces. The delay cut all of it. The network immediately shifted to a replay from a wide angle. Then, a commercial break. By the time the broadcast returned, the player was being lifted onto a stretcher with far less emotion visible around him. No one watching at home ever saw the shock on the faces of the men who shared the field with him. The delay removed those first seconds of raw panic. And with them went the emotional impact that might have forced audiences to confront the real cost of the sport. The delay also filtered out altercations that teams and the league preferred to keep quiet. One that stands out happened during a heated divisional rivalry. Two offensive linemen, both playing through injuries and exhaustion, exchanged shoves after a failed play. It escalated quickly. Helmets clashed. Punches were thrown. It lasted only a few seconds, but it revealed the boiling tension beneath the surface of a struggling team. The broadcast cut away the moment the first shove began. When the play-by-play announcer returned, he talked about miscommunication on the field rather than the confrontation that had just unfolded. That confrontation would later become a story within the locker room, a private moment in a public setting that millions never saw. The delay had taken it out of existence. Some of the most striking examples involve sideline meltdowns. Football demands emotional intensity, but that intensity can turn volatile. There was a game where a veteran safety screamed at his defensive coordinator so loudly that it drew players from other units. The exchange was intense and deeply personal. The delay removed every second of it. What viewers saw instead were shots of the crowd and clips from earlier in the game. When the broadcast finally returned to the sideline, everyone involved had walked away, leaving only quiet tension behind. The public never felt the heat of that moment. They were given a sanitized version that suggested nothing more than normal competitive frustration. As I studied these patterns, I began to understand that the delay created a form of selective visibility. The league did not need to erase everything. It only needed to erase the moments that challenged the carefully crafted identity it wanted to maintain. This raised difficult moral questions. Football is a sport built on authenticity, just sold as a raw, unfiltered expression of physical and emotional truth. Yet behind the scenes, the delay quietly shapes which truths are acceptable and which must be hidden. The power to erase is not only about what is hidden, but also about what becomes the dominant version of the story. Without those moments, the public never saw the depth of their character. In other cases, the delay protected players who might have faced severe criticism if certain actions had been shown. And while protection has its place, it also deprives the audience of the full truth. It creates an imbalance between perception and reality. Personalities are flattened, situations are simplified. The truth becomes secondary to the polished narrative. These questions extend beyond individual players. They touch on the emotional honesty of the sport itself. If the delay constantly removes the rough edges, the public begins to believe that football is cleaner and calmer than it really is. That belief then influences how fans react to the moments that do slip through. When a rare confrontation makes it on air, the reaction becomes amplified because it breaks the illusion. Fans respond with shock and outrage. Not because the moment is unprecedented, but because it contradicts the sanitized version they have been conditioned to expect. Some might argue that protecting the audience is a noble purpose. And at times, it is. No one wants families to witness a player in severe medical distress before staff can arrive. No one wants unfiltered language shouted into living rooms. But there is a difference between responsible stewardship and complete control. Responsibility seeks to prevent harm. Control seeks to reshape perception. The broadcast delay straddles that line, and the league often decides on which side it prefers to stand. There is a deeper question here, one that lingers long after the stadium lights fade. What happens to the emotional truth of a sport when a system exists that can remove whatever feels inconvenient? The moments players fear most, the moments they regret, the moments that reveal who they truly are under pressure. When the public does not see these moments, narratives become incomplete, and incomplete narratives can distort judgments for years. I have spoken to retired players who were stunned to learn how many of their most difficult moments were never televised. One former quarterback told me he assumed that every mistake he made was broadcast live. When he discovered that the delay had removed parts of his sideline outbursts, he felt both relieved and unsettled. He said it made him wonder how much of his identity in the public eye was built on a version of himself that the world never fully saw. I have always been fascinated by the fragile line between hero and villain in football. The field is a place of constant judgment, where every decision, every movement, every glance is open to interpretation. And yet, when you add broadcast delay into the equation, that judgment is no longer entirely in the hands of the people who witness the action firsthand. It is partly in the hands of directors, producers, and editors who decide what the public will see and when. In those few seconds, reputations can be forged or shattered. Villains can be created not by deeds alone, but by the way those deeds are presented. One of the most striking examples comes from the late 80s. A running back collided with a defender during a crucial play. On the field, it was a clean but forceful hit, the kind expected in the middle of a playoff game. The defender fell awkwardly. The crowd reacted with a mix of gasps and cheers, and the game continued. But the camera angle that made it to national broadcast emphasized the defender's contorted expression and the running back's momentum in a way that suggested intent rather than accident. Viewers at home saw a moment of calculated aggression. Headlines followed the next morning, describing a deliberate assault on a defenseless player. That replay, appearing just seconds after the hit, became the image that defined the running back's reputation for the rest of his career. It is easy to underestimate how a single replay angle can carry so much weight. On the field, players and coaches interpret actions based on context, prior experience, and understanding of intent. Television audiences lack that perspective. They rely on what is shown to them. And if what is shown is curated through a delay, the moment can be framed to highlight one emotion, one perspective, one interpretation. For some players, that framing was enough to turn them into villains overnight. They were judged not by what they did in reality, but by the version of it chosen for public consumption. Another case occurred during a divisional rivalry game in the 90s. A linebacker was attempting to break up a pass. He brushed a receiver slightly harder than necessary. In the stadium, everyone recognized it as part of the aggressive nature of the position. The receiver shrugged it off and continued running. But the broadcast replay slowed and replayed from a specific angle, made the push look deliberate. The announcer's commentary emphasized the aggression as though it crossed a moral line. By the time the segment concluded, fans were questioning the player's ethics. Letters to the network, opinion pieces, and fan chatter painted him as reckless and dangerous. All of it stemmed from the choices made in those seconds of delay and the angles selected for replay. It is remarkable to think that someone's identity could be molded by fractions of time and selected imagery. On the field, players are aware of the consequences of their actions, but also trust the context of those around them. Off the field, they confront an audience that knows nothing of context and judges only the images and interpretations delivered through broadcast. Delay amplifies that difference. It isolates moments from their surroundings and highlights them in ways that can distort reality. It creates villains where none existed, or it magnifies flaws into defining characteristics. I have spoken to several players who spent years trying to reconcile their on-field intentions with public perception. One defensive back described a moment where he dove for a ball and inadvertently collided with a receiver. The cameras caught the collision from an angle that emphasized force rather than technique. Social media did not exist at the time, but televised reactions and newspaper commentary were enough to label him aggressive, unsportsmanlike, and even dangerous. He told me it was a source of frustration throughout his career because the public had never seen the reality of the play. In a sport that prides itself on fairness and skill, he was judged by a curated fraction of a second. There were also quarterbacks who became the focus of villain narratives because of broadcast delay. One mid-career star was shown on replay yelling at his offensive line after a sack. On the field, it was an understandable emotional reaction, brief and contextualized by prior plays. On television, the sequence was replayed multiple times, slowed and framed with commentary suggesting arrogance and blame. The audience at home had no idea of the cumulative pressure that led to that outburst. They only saw the anger. For weeks, he was characterized in columns and fan discussions as petulant and self-centered. The delay had taken an ordinary emotional expression and transformed it into a defining narrative. What I came to understand over time is that this power to shape villains was not always malicious. Broadcast teams often argued that they were providing clarity, emphasizing drama, or highlighting noteworthy moments. But clarity and drama can easily slide into moral framing. Every angle, every pause, every slow-motion replay carries the potential to suggest intent, to question character, and to assign blame. The delay gives producers a moment to select the precise frame that will be transmitted, and with that selection comes responsibility. The NFL's shield protects, but it also decides whose flaws are amplified and whose virtues are celebrated. There were cases where entire careers were touched by this phenomenon. A wide receiver in the late 90s became known for dirty play based almost entirely on delayed replays of incidental contact. His real style was physical, but within the rules. On the field, he was respected by teammates and opponents alike. On television, the delayed replay repeatedly isolated moments that appeared malicious. Fans never saw the context, and when they did not see context, their perception hardened. Even years later, when analysts revisited the plays, the narrative had already taken hold. Once the villain label is applied, it is extraordinarily difficult to remove. And in football, as in life, first impressions often become the lasting ones. The power of delay extended beyond aggression. Players could be cast as uncooperative, arrogant, or indifferent based on moments filtered through timing and angle. A defensive lineman might be shown standing while trainers attended to an opponent, implying callousness. In reality, he may have been observing a line of scrimmage adjustment or responding to a coach. The delay allowed editors to isolate a frame, freeze it, and deliver it out of context. Villainy became a narrative constructed by seconds, a narrative that existed only because of the gap between real time and broadcast time. I often think about the ethical implications. Should a league that presents itself as fair and honorable allow seconds of delay to define morality in the public eye? Should the power to shape reputation belong to those who control the camera feeds rather than those who perform the actions? In football, every hit, every tackle, every reaction carries risk. The reality is chaotic, emotional, and human. The public's understanding, filtered through delayed broadcasts, becomes artificially orderly. Villainy becomes a product of curation rather than consequence. It is also important to note that the consequences of these narratives are not purely abstract. Players faced consequences in contract negotiations, media relations, and public endorsements based on reputations forged in those seconds. Fan behavior, from boos in stadiums to hostile commentary, was influenced by replay angles chosen during the delay. Careers were shaped by what viewers were allowed to see. In some cases, reputations hardened in ways that the players themselves could neither predict nor control. The NFL had created a system where perception, carefully guided, became a currency almost as valuable as performance on the field. Perhaps the most striking aspect is how enduring these narratives can be. A single broadcast moment, selected and delayed, can reverberate for years. The narrative it produces is repeated in highlight reels, in anniversary recaps, in documentaries. Audiences who never saw the original live action internalize a version of events that has been mediated, curated, and sometimes manipulated. Villains are made from moments that may have been fleeting or misunderstood. Delay does not just protect the shield, it constructs the lens through which the shield is understood, determining who is celebrated and who is condemned. As I reflect on all of this, I realize that the power to create villains reveals the larger influence of broadcast delay on the sport itself. It is not merely a tool for censorship or preservation. It is a mechanism for storytelling, for narrative construction, and for cultural framing. In football, a fraction of a second can define identity. A replay angle, chosen during a delay, can shape legacy. The men who play this game live with that reality, even if the public never understands it. And as the sport grows more commercial, more mediated, and more scrutinized, the stakes only rise. The delay is not neutral. It has moral weight, emotional impact, and cultural consequence. And when used, intentionally or not, it has the power to turn ordinary athletes into villains, heroes, or symbols that never quite match the truth of what happened on the field. That is the hidden world that most fans never see. It is the world behind the delay, where seconds can become legends, where perception can outweigh reality, and where reputations can be built or destroyed long before the whistle is blown. I have spent decades following football and studying how moments are shaped before they reach the public. If the broadcast delay can create villains, it can just as easily save heroes. There is a subtle power in those seconds of delay. It can soften embarrassment, it can redirect attention, and it can shape narratives in ways that protect the reputations of players who might otherwise have been judged harshly for human mistakes. In a sport that thrives on perfection and punishes error, the delay provides a rare mercy, a small buffer between action and judgment. I remember one instance vividly. A quarterback in the late 90s was scrambling for his life, trying to avoid a relentless pass rush. He fumbled the ball, sending it rolling into the end zone. In the stadium, the reaction was immediate. Some fans cheered the turnover, some groaned. His teammates scrambled to recover. In the moment, it could have been disastrous for his image. But the broadcast delay allowed the directors to cut to a replay from a different angle, showing him diving to save possession. When the camera returned to live action, the quarterback was being congratulated for a near recovery. Viewers at home did not see the initial panic as sharply. The narrative became one of effort and courage rather than failure. The delay had given the league a way to protect him, to shape the story so that the public saw resilience rather than error. Timing is everything. In another case, a wide receiver slipped while running a route, sending the ball straight into a defender's hands. The stadium reaction was a mixture of laughter and disbelief. A moment that could have been humiliating for a star player was smoothed over in the broadcast. The delay allowed producers to cut 2 crowd shots, reactions from teammates, and commentary about the difficulty of the route rather than the slip itself. By the time the broadcast returned, the emphasis was on strategy and the effort to recover. Audiences left with sympathy rather than scorn. That player later reflected that he was grateful. The public never judged him too harshly because the narrative had been guided before it reached their screens. There is an almost cinematic quality to this type of intervention. The delay gives the production team a moment to decide which elements of emotion, action, and consequence should be highlighted. They can emphasize heroism, courage, or effort instead of failure or embarrassment. They can choose the camera angle, the replay timing, the commentary, and even the audio levels to craft a narrative that elevates rather than diminishes. It is a form of storytelling that exists outside the player's control, but can have profound effects on their public image. I think about defensive plays, which are often chaotic and emotionally charged. A cornerback jumping to intercept a pass may collide with a receiver, stumble, or even fall awkwardly. In real time, the impression could be clumsy or embarrassing. With a few seconds of delay, the broadcast can cut to a slow-motion replay, emphasizing the athleticism of the leap and the technical precision of the interception. In that way, a potentially humiliating moment becomes one of skill and determination. Fans perceive the player as composed, capable, and even heroic. It is a subtle manipulation of perception, but one that can have lifelong consequences for the player's reputation. Timing also plays a crucial role in shaping how controversial moments are perceived. Consider penalties called during crucial plays. A defensive player may have committed a technical foul. Yet the delay allows the broadcast to focus first on the impact of the play, the effort displayed, and the broader context. Viewers absorb the drama without immediately forming a harsh judgment. Later, the penalty is discussed analytically, sometimes even with sympathy for the player's intent or circumstances. In this way, Delay protects players by guiding the narrative before public scrutiny can take hold. I've spoken to several players who described this protection as invisible, yet deeply felt. One veteran linebacker said that he had made mistakes that could have embarrassed him if seen from a single live angle. Yet the delay provided a small buffer, a few seconds during which the cameras and commentary could emphasize context, effort, or mitigating factors. To the audience, it looked like calculated skill rather than error. That buffer allowed him to maintain confidence in himself and preserved public trust, which in a sport defined by reputation is invaluable. Even in moments of emotional vulnerability, delay serves as a protective tool. Players show frustration, disappointment, or despair during games. In a stadium, teammates and staff witness these raw expressions. Without delay, cameras might immediately capture and broadcast them. The public sees resilience rather than despair, strength rather than weakness. Delay becomes a shield, not just for the league, but for the players themselves, safeguarding their emotional and professional standing. There are notable cases where delay transformed potential scandal into sympathetic storytelling. A running back in a pivotal game was blindsided and dropped hard. In real time, the hit looked violent and reckless. Stadium cameras caught both the physical shock and the player's immediate response. With delay, the broadcast cut away to a replay showing the athletic positioning of both players, contextualizing the hit as part of the game rather than an intentional act. Commentary emphasized the unpredictability of football and the toughness of both athletes. To viewers at home, the moment became a testament to resilience and courage instead of carelessness or recklessness. The ethical dimension of this is complex. On one hand, protecting players from unfair judgment seems just. No athlete wants their career or character defined by a fleeting misstep captured from a misleading angle. On the other hand, it raises questions about the authenticity of the public's understanding. Delay can create a curated reality, but that reality is designed to preserve image and minimize harm. In football, a sport already mediated by rules, coaching, and team strategies, this additional layer shapes perception in ways that can profoundly alter a player's legacy. Even today, in the era of instant replay and social media, the principle remains. Delay allows the broadcast to highlight heroism and minimize humiliation in the moment. Before the narrative escapes the control of the production team, it is a tool for managing perception, guiding judgment, and protecting careers. Players have often expressed gratitude for it, acknowledging that it offers a chance for understanding rather than condemnation. The seconds provided by delay become a buffer between human fallibility and public perception, between error and judgment. I reflect on how this plays out across different types of plays. Interceptions, crucial tackles, blocked kicks, and near misses all benefit from the narrative-shaping power of delay, even when the action is complex, chaotic, or potentially embarrassing. The broadcast has the ability to guide the viewer's understanding. The league, the producers, and the announcers can emphasize the athleticism, the quick thinking, and the courage involved. By the time the public forms an opinion, they have seen a version of the moment that honors skill and effort, softening the blow of human error. Delay also serves as a strategic tool in building long-term player reputations. Heroes are not simply defined by winning plays, they're defined by how those plays are perceived. A well-timed replay, guided commentary, and selective focus can make an ordinary play heroic. This creates a narrative of competence, toughness, and reliability, often shielding players from unfair scrutiny and helping the audience understand football not just as a game of outcomes, but as a game of skill, judgment, and heart. Ultimately, the broadcast delay represents a paradox. It is a form of intervention in what is ostensibly live, unscripted sport. Yet in intervening, it preserves authenticity in a different sense. It protects players from unfair characterizations and allows audiences to see the game as it could ideally be understood, as a contest of skill, courage, and human will. The seconds gained by delay become an invisible hand-shaping narratives of heroism. They turn moments that might embarrass into moments that inspire. They remind us that football is not only about what happens, on the field, but also about how those moments are understood and remembered. I have long been fascinated by the way human perception is shaped not only by what we see, but by how we see it. In football, that understanding becomes crucial. A single replay, slowed down and replayed just seconds after the live action, can completely alter the way a moment is interpreted. In those split seconds, the meaning of an action, the intent behind a decision, and the character of a player can all be transformed. The broadcast delay, combined with replay technology, gives the league and its production teams an extraordinary amount of influence over public perception. It is the invisible architecture behind the way we judge every tackle, pass, and collision. Cognitive psychology teaches us that the human brain is highly sensitive to timing, framing, and repetition. When an incident is replayed in slow motion, viewers interpret it differently than they would in real time. Movements that appear natural or inconsequential at full speed can seem deliberate, aggressive, or careless when stretched out over fractions of a second. A player's glance, the angle of a swing, or the trajectory of a tackle can be misread, even if in reality it was completely ordinary. On the field, teammates and coaches understand the context. They see the rhythm, the decision-making, and the intention. Off the field, viewers only see the curated moment, often enhanced by slow motion, commentary, and selective framing. It is a powerful mechanism for shaping narratives. I recall an incident in the early 2000s involving a defensive end. During a critical play, he collided with a receiver just as the ball arrived. Live, the contact was incidental, a natural outcome of aggressive coverage. Teammates barely flinched, understanding it as routine football. But the replay, slowed and repeated from multiple angles, created a different impression. To viewers at home, the motions seemed deliberate, almost malicious. Commentators discussed the hit as if it were a conscious attempt to intimidate or harm. Social reaction followed immediately. Fans debated intent. Analysts dissected morality. The defensive end spent weeks addressing questions that never existed on the field in real time. That single replay, combined with a delay of only a few seconds, had reshaped the narrative entirely. Players feel this influence acutely. I have spoken to quarterbacks, linemen, and wide receivers who describe the frustration of seeing themselves judged by split-second footage rather than by context or intent. One receiver told me that he would execute a perfectly legal block, only to see the replay suggest recklessness. Teammates knew it was correct, the referees understood it, but fans at home often saw only the isolated motion, the delay. By giving producers the ability to select exactly when and how that moment is broadcast, amplified the impact of perception over reality. A single decision that might have gone unnoticed in the chaos of the live game became a defining moment in public memory. The slow motion effect compounds this influence. Every fraction of a second, stretched and replayed, changes how the brain interprets intent. A hit that took 1 second in real time might be expanded to 5 or 6 in slow motion, creating the impression of deliberation. The human mind tends to assign motive to movement. When the delay allows a replay to be framed this way, audiences naturally begin to question the player's intent. That scrutiny can feel unbearable to those who live the moment in real time, knowing that intent was never malicious, aggressive, or deliberate. The split second created by delay becomes a kind of narrative trap. In addition to intent, slow motion also affects the perception of timing and causality. A defensive back who reacts a fraction of a second too late may appear reckless when a replay is carefully framed. An offensive lineman who shifts weight incorrectly may seem responsible for a collision that was unavoidable. Players understand these nuances, but the broadcast, guided by the delay, selects the narrative that reaches millions. Those choices shape careers, fan sentiment, and even contract negotiations. Athletes learn that their actions are not only physical, but also interpretive. How they will be perceived depends as much on milliseconds and angles as on skill. I have observed multiple games where slow-motion replays influenced public debate about morality. A quarterback overthrows a pass, a receiver collides with a defender, and suddenly the replay, slowed and highlighted, suggests carelessness or even aggression. Commentators frame the moment with words that imply intent rather than circumstance. Fans unprepared for the context they do not see internalize that judgment. The delay provides the time necessary to control the framing, guiding perception, and subtly dictating opinion. For the player, it can feel like a battle against forces entirely outside their control. The cognitive impact is measurable. Studies in perception and memory demonstrate that repeated exposure to slowed, replayed, and framed moments intensifies judgments. Once an audience has seen a replay from multiple angles, the brain consolidates that version as the definitive reality. Subsequent recollections, opinions, and discussions reinforce that constructed memory, often at the expense of understanding what actually occurred in real time. The broadcast delay is the mechanism that allows producers to create these moments, select their framing, and establish them as authoritative narratives. Frustration among players is compounded by the fact that they cannot counteract the narrative in the moment. On the field, they are focused on strategy, execution, and competition. Off the field, public discourse unfolds at a pace they cannot match. By the time interviews, statements, or corrections are possible, the narrative has already taken hold. One veteran offensive lineman explained that slow-motion replays, selected and aired with only a slight delay, often created controversies that never existed. For him, it was a reminder that perception and reality are separate arenas, each with its own consequences. The split-second difference also affects refereeing. Officials make decisions in real time, yet the broadcast delay allows slow motion to critique their calls. Viewers, seeing only selected frames, perceive mistakes or favoritism that were invisible to those on the field. The players, having committed themselves to instantaneous judgment, see their actions judged in a frozen frame detached from flow, momentum, and context. The delay amplifies scrutiny and shapes narratives of competence and morality. I have come to see that the delay, combined with replay technology, functions as a subtle form of narrative architecture. It does not just report events. It shapes the emotional and moral interpretation of those events. In some cases, it protects players by emphasizing skill or heroism. In other cases, it transforms ordinary errors into moral failings. The cognitive psychology at work in the viewer's mind ensures that what is presented through delayed, slowed, and framed imagery becomes the standard against which players are judged. The public sees the curated narrative, and players live with its consequences. Reflecting on this, I recognize that the split second created by delay is not merely technical. It is ethical, psychological, and cultural. It shapes perception, influences public opinion, and mediates the tension between action and judgment. It allows the league to control both the story and the morality assigned to players' behavior. In doing so, it magnifies the consequences of what the audience sees and minimizes what is left unseen. It is a quiet but profound power, a second-long window that can define careers and reshape the collective understanding of the game. The interplay of delay and replay is a reminder that in professional football, milliseconds carry weight beyond athletic performance. They carry judgment, they carry narrative, they carry identity. A moment that lasts a second on the field may last indefinitely in memory, perception, and discourse once it has been slowed, replayed, and broadcast. The split second changes everything. I have spent countless hours observing football as both a sport and a cultural phenomenon, and I have come to understand that its brutality is both celebrated and concealed. The NFL markets toughness, resilience, and physical domination, yet it also markets itself as family-friendly entertainment. This duality exists in tension, and broadcast delay has become one of the tools that allows it to survive. The delay is invisible to fans, yet it quietly mediates how violence is presented. It protects viewers from the rawest consequences of collisions, concussions, and injuries, while preserving the spectacle of controlled aggression that defines the game. The game itself is unrelenting. Hits are violent, tackles are calculated but forceful, and collisions carry a risk of permanent harm. Players know the stakes. Every practice, every snap, every second on the field is a negotiation between performance and survival. Yet for audiences, the violence must be consumable. Families watch from living rooms, sponsors attach their brands, and networks depend on broad viewership. The delay provides a buffer, allowing production teams to control what is shown, what is emphasized, and what is hidden. The public sees the play, the drama, and the athleticism, but often does not see the full extent of the physical trauma occurring on the field. A replay might cut to a wide-angle view of the field. A commercial break would intervene, or commentary would focus on the ball rather than the collision. The player might stagger, grimace, or be assisted to the sidelines, but what viewers saw was carefully curated. That gap between the real event and the broadcast is where perception is managed. The trauma exists, but the spectacle remains consumable. I remember watching a linebacker collide with a running back during a high-stakes playoff game. The hit was textbook in its execution, but brutally powerful. By the time the cameras returned to the scene, the player was on his feet or being assisted off. And the audience perceived a moment of toughness rather than a near injury. Violence had occurred, but it was mediated, softened, and contained for public consumption. It is not only concussions, broken bones, ligament tears, and even minor injuries are often framed in ways that maintain the narrative of controlled aggression. A player may land awkwardly, grimace, and collapse in pain. But the broadcast delay allows the network to emphasize crowd energy, the next play, or the strategy, rather than the immediate consequences. In this way, the league can show the intensity of the sport without exposing audiences to the full scope of human suffering inherent in it. The delay becomes a tool for balancing authenticity with comfort, brutality with palatability. This dual role creates ethical questions. Players are risking their bodies for a spectacle that is carefully filtered before it reaches the public. Fans often assume that what they see is representative of the physical cost of football, but the truth is more complex. Delay mediates perception. It shields audiences from moments that might be disturbing while maintaining the overall impression of drama and excitement. In doing so, it masks the scale and immediacy of injuries, shaping a public understanding that is at once accurate in outcome but incomplete in experience. There were games where sideline meltdowns and injuries were almost completely invisible to viewers because of the delay. One wide receiver sustained a high ankle sprain in a routine cut. In real time, the pain was visible, his movements compromised, and teammates instinctively adjusted to support him. Yet the broadcast delay cut to a replay of the prior play, followed by commentary on the defensive alignment. The injury existed. The trauma existed. But the public, consuming the broadcast, remained largely unaware. The delay had transformed a moment of pain into a neutral narrative. I have interviewed former NFL players who described frustration and even resentment about this practice. They understood that broadcast delay protected them from public scrutiny in moments of vulnerability, yet it also concealed the realities of the game. Fans cheered and critiqued based on the curated action, unaware of the intensity and risk experienced by the men on the field. In some cases, delay created an illusion of safety that was far from reality. The league relies on spectacle to maintain its cultural relevance, yet it cannot present the sport in unfiltered reality. Delay allows it to balance the two, to present an image of controlled intensity while hiding the most dangerous and disturbing aspects. Fans experience drama, athletes experience trauma, and the truth exists somewhere in between. In reflecting on this, I have come to understand that the shadows created by delay are as significant as the moments broadcast. They define what audiences know, how they respond, and how players are remembered. The violence that exists in real time is mediated, softened, and sometimes erased. Yet it shapes careers, informs culture, and dictates the experience of those who play. In those shadows, the NFL maintains a careful balance between the brutality at the heart of the sport and the family-friendly image that sustains it. In football, few moments are as viscerally compelling as a big hit. The roar of the crowd, the force of the collision, the immediate reaction of players and coaches is pure intensity. Yet for viewers at home, the experience is rarely identical to what occurs on the field. Broadcast delay allows networks to sanitize these moments, presenting them in a way that highlights drama without exposing the raw violence that the athletes endure. This difference between real-time experience and delayed broadcast creates a subtle emotional disconnect, one that fundamentally alters how the public perceives the game and the players who risk their bodies within it. I recall watching a game from the late 90s where a defensive end launched himself at the quarterback in a perfectly timed sack. In the stadium, the collision was thunderous. The crowd gasped, Trainers leaned forward, teammates reacted instinctively, and the quarterback hit the turf with a force that would leave a lasting impact. For the fans in the stands, the experience was immediate, chaotic, and overwhelming. It was a moment of tension, danger, and human vulnerability. They witnessed every fraction of a second, every contorted movement, every reaction to pain. For the millions watching at home, however, the story was different. The broadcast delay allowed producers to cut to a wider shot of the field, emphasize the play's strategic context, and highlight the defensive scheme rather than the physical impact. Commentary focused on the quarterback's poise, the defensive end's anticipation, and the outcome of the play, rather than the sudden force of the collision. The replay slowed slightly, emphasized athleticism rather than potential injury. In effect, the moment was sanitized. Viewers experienced drama without danger, skill without suffering, and intensity without the fear that gripped the stadium. This sanitized presentation produces a cognitive gap between the people in the arena and those at home. Fans in the stands feel the emotional weight of the collision. They react to instinct, adrenaline, and empathy for the player's physical vulnerability. Home viewers, however, absorb a curated version of the same moment. They see a dramatic event, but the human cost is muted. The emotional intensity is softened, the perception of risk is reduced, and the rawness of the sport is filtered through seconds of delay and editorial judgment. The same hit, experienced in two environments, produces fundamentally different emotional reactions. I have spoken to players who are acutely aware of this disconnect. One linebacker described executing a textbook tackle during a nationally televised game. When the play aired, however, the cameras highlighted the receiver's ball control, the defensive alignment, and the strategic implications, rather than the collision itself. Fans at home were impressed with the defensive skill, but largely unaware of the physical struggle that had occurred. The delay, combined with selective framing, mediated the audience's perception. The intensity of real-time experience did not fully translate. Sanitized hits also shape narratives about toughness. Football thrives on mythologies of resilience, courage, and physical sacrifice. Yet, when the most violent or dangerous moments are filtered, the mythology becomes partial. Fans believe they understand the game's risks, but they only see a portion of reality. The sanitized hit reinforces the perception of skill without emphasizing the bodily toll, creating a disconnect between what is lived and what is observed. Consider a running back breaking through the defensive line. In the stadium, every contact point is palpable. The jolt of impact, the shift of momentum, the momentary loss of balance. Fans experience the collision as a narrative in real time, complete with tension and uncertainty. At home, the same play is slowed, cut, and narrated in a way that accentuates strategy and athleticism while downplaying risk. The delay frames the hit as calculated, almost elegant, rather than chaotic and potentially harmful. The audience experiences mastery without the vulnerability. The emotional truth of the hit is lost or muted. Replays amplify this effect. By showing slow-motion sequences of collisions, the broadcast can emphasize technique, timing, and positioning rather than force or injury. A quarterback's body hitting the ground might be replayed to highlight his mechanics in absorbing contact. A running back stumbling into a defender is framed as spatial awareness or agility. The human toll the suddenness of pain, the unpredictability of movement, the risk of injuries obscured. Slow motion and delay transform the hit into a lesson in skill rather than an exhibition of raw human vulnerability. This emotional disconnect has consequences for audience perception. Fans judge players on composure, athleticism, and performance, often unaware of the subtle and violent realities they navigate. Reputation is built on the curated presentation rather than the physical reality. Players who appear composed on television may have endured injuries, bruises, or concussions that the public does not see. Conversely, moments of error or perceived recklessness may be amplified through replay, creating disproportionate judgment. The split between real-time experience and delayed broadcast shapes the moral and emotional lens through which players are viewed. Sanitization also affects cultural narratives about football. The sport is celebrated for courage, endurance, and resilience. Yet broadcast delay ensures that the most alarming aspects of human fragility are muted. The audience experiences a controlled version of danger, one that emphasizes drama without risk. This creates a sense of security that is misleading. Fans may cheer collisions that are actually far more dangerous than they appear, unaware of the potential for long-term harm. Players, on the other hand, operate fully within that danger, experiencing its consequences without acknowledgement from the viewing public. The ethical dimension is stark. Sanitized hits protect viewers and preserve the family-friendly image of the league, yet they conceal reality. They shape public perception in ways that prioritize entertainment over full understanding. Players are exposed to physical consequences that the audience never fully witnesses. The delay becomes a mechanism not just of storytelling, but of cultural mediation, allowing fans to enjoy spectacle without confronting the inherent risks of the sport. I have interviewed sports psychologists who describe how this disconnect can influence fan behavior. People cheer, celebrate, and discuss moments based on mediated perception rather than reality. This influences expectations of toughness, acceptable risk, and athletic behavior. Fans internalize a version of football that is simultaneously violent and controlled, aware of danger but never fully confronting its immediacy. Players are both heroes and hidden victims, performing feats that appear almost effortless through the lens of delayed broadcast. Even as the NFL has increased awareness of injuries and long-term consequences, the sanitized hit remains a fixture of modern broadcasts. Networks balance the thrill of collision with the responsibility to manage public perception. The split between stadium experience and living room reception persists, maintained by the seconds of delay that allow producers to guide attention and shape interpretation. Violence exists in full force on the field, yet the emotional reality is selectively transmitted. Fans experience excitement, skill, and drama, while much of the risk remains invisible. In reflecting on this, I realize that the sanitized hit exemplifies the power of broadcast delay to mediate both perception and narrative. It creates a curated version of the game, one that protects the audience while subtly shaping moral, emotional, and cultural judgments. The emotional disconnect between stadium and living room is both profound and instructive. The game as broadcast is not identical to the game as lived. In those sanitized collisions, we see both the glory and the hidden cost of football. The roar of a stadium, the tension in a critical third down play, the shock of a controversial call, all of it feeds a narrative that captivates millions. Yet emotion can be unpredictable. Fan outrage, in particular, is a force that leagues and networks have learned to anticipate, manage, and sometimes suppress. A hit that could have been interpreted as malicious, a personal foul that might have been perceived as unfair, or a referee's controversial call all have the potential to provoke intense public criticism. Networks, using delay, can slow the moment, choose the camera angle, and highlight mitigating context. They can replay previous successful plays, cut to commentary that reframes the incident, or even insert crowd shots that emphasize celebration rather than dissent. The stadium exploded with immediate criticism, coaches and teammates reacting instinctively to defend the player. Commentary emphasized the split-second nature of decision-making and the unpredictability of player movement. This buffer is critical in professional sports, where millions of viewers form opinions instantly, often on social media. A network's ability to frame, sequence, and contextualize incidents ensures that public anger is not only managed, but shaped. The seconds of delay are the seconds in which perception is molded. Players are acutely aware of this dynamic. I have spoken to quarterbacks and defensive linemen who described moments where they were almost certain the public would react harshly to a perceived error or violation. Yet the delayed broadcast, combined with carefully selected replay angles and commentary, reframed their actions. The difference between a career-defining scandal and a temporary talking point often came down to the production choices made during those few critical seconds. In football, where reputation and fan perception are intertwined with legacy and marketability, the ability to control outrage is a form of protection and narrative power. At home, broadcast delay allows for the sequencing of events, emphasis on positive plays, and framing that mitigates perceived malice. Anger is still present, but it is calibrated. The audience receives a story in which context and emotion are balanced, rather than a flood of unfiltered outrage. The ethical dimension of controlling outrage is complex. On one hand, it protects the league, the players, and the fans from spiraling reactions that could threaten reputations or provoke unnecessary conflict. On the other hand, it raises questions about authenticity, transparency, and the audience's right to witness events as they occurred. Broadcast delay is invisible, yet it exerts profound influence over how the public understands moral responsibility, competitive fairness, and sportsmanship. The seconds of intervention are powerful enough to shape collective memory. Historical examples abound. In the early 1990s, a quarterback was controversially hit after releasing the ball, causing what appeared to be a dangerous late collision. Social media did not exist as it does today. But fan outrage still erupted through call-ins, letters, and press coverage. Networks delayed the broadcast of the replay and interspersed analysis that contextualized the hit, pointing out angles, momentum, and timing. What might have been perceived as a reckless, career-threatening act was reframed as an unfortunate but unavoidable play. Audience anger was channeled into measured discussion rather than unfiltered condemnation. Relief, because public outrage can be career-altering, especially when incidents are isolated and taken out of context. Frustration, because the audience's understanding is curated, meaning they are never judged purely by their actions in real time. One veteran defensive lineman said that in moments of potential public criticism, he would always wonder how the broadcast would handle the replay. The delay became a psychological shield, but also a reminder that perception, not reality, often dictates reputation. And and integrity, is constantly at risk from uncontrolled outrage. Fans interpret raw footage in ways that can influence ticket sales, viewership, sponsorship, and broader public perception. The delay allows networks and the league to exercise a form of narrative triage. Controversial incidents are managed before they reach a critical mass, diffusing anger while maintaining drama and engagement. Humans react instinctively to perceived injustice or aggression. When a moment is delayed, contextualized, and framed, the brain reassesses. This is not deception in the traditional sense. It is curation, shaping perception within the invisible architecture of broadcast. Moments that could have provoked public condemnation are transformed into learning experiences, debated analytically rather than emotionally. In reflecting on this, I understand that broadcast delay serves as both shield and scalpel. It protects players from undue criticism while slicing narratives in ways that guide moral judgment. It is a quiet, invisible power, one that governs not just perception of individual plays, but the collective, moral understanding of the sport itself. The seconds of intervention control the rhythm of outrage, transforming instinctive anger into curated discussion. Broadcast delay functions as a gatekeeper of morality and emotion. It allows moments of potential fury to be reframed, analyzed, and softened before reaching the public. There is a quiet power in the studio that few outside the broadcast world fully appreciate. It is not the field, the stadium, or the players that dictate the narrative in modern football. A lineman executes a perfect block, a receiver makes a clean catch in traffic, or a quarterback evades a blitz with precise movement. In real time, the audience might respond with a cheer, a shout, or quiet appreciation. But within the controlled environment of a broadcast studio, commentary can amplify or diminish that moment before it reaches viewers. Analysts provide context, opinion, and framing that suggests heroism, carelessness, aggression, or brilliance. A few well-chosen words, spoken as the replay rolls, can reframe intent, morality, and significance. By the time the home audience fully registers the moment, their perception has already been shaped by the studio's narrative. I recall an incident during a nationally televised game where a defensive back intercepted a pass under heavy pressure. In the stadium, the crowd erupted instantly. Players on the sideline high-fived, coaches nodded, and the moment was electric. At home, the delayed broadcast allowed commentators to guide perception. The replay highlighted the quarterback's poor positioning and the defensive back's anticipation, subtly framing the moment as a lesson in strategy rather than an isolated act of skill. By the time viewers processed what they saw, the narrative of preparation, intelligence, and calculated execution was embedded. The defensive back was elevated in reputation, not simply for his physical achievement, but for the interpretation delivered by the studio. This influence extends in both directions. A moment that could tarnish a player's reputation can be softened, and conversely, a minor mistake can be amplified into a defining narrative. One veteran wide receiver told me that he has lost count of how many times a studio segment has transformed the perception of a play. Conversely, moments of triumph can be contextualized in a way that emphasizes brilliance over luck. The broadcast studio is an arbiter of perception, and the seconds of delay give them the control needed to craft the story. They are constructed in the studio within seconds of a play, guided by expert voices, replay angles, and strategic timing. A player's public identity, the heroism, aggression, or perceived recklessness, often determined as much by how the moment is narrated as by the moment itself. The combination of delay and commentary creates a mediated reality, one that the audience experiences as live, authentic, and immediate, even though every word and every frame has been curated to shape perception. The stakes are enormous. Careers, endorsements, fan loyalty, and contract negotiations can be influenced by a single curated narrative. A controversial hit, replayed with commentary, emphasizing intent, can follow a player for years, defining their reputation in the public eye. Conversely, a skillful maneuver can be overlooked if commentary downplays the moment or reframes it as routine. Players understand that the field is only part of the game. The studio controls how the world remembers their achievements, failures, and character. One illustrative case involved a quarterback who was sacked in a critical playoff game. In real time, it was a high-pressure moment, executed flawlessly by the defensive line. Fans in the stadium cheered, understanding the skill involved. At home, the broadcast delay allowed the studio to intercut commentary on the quarterback's prior decisions, defensive strategy, and positioning. The replay emphasized a small error in pocket awareness, making the sack appear partially his fault. Social media and fan forums picked up on this interpretation instantly. The broadcast delay is not just a technical tool, it's a social and psychological instrument that shapes identity, public understanding, and long-term judgment. The effect of delayed commentary also extends to fan culture. Viewers rarely recognize the extent to which their initial reactions are guided by narration. What feels like spontaneous outrage, admiration, or debate is often a response to curated framing. Slow motion, angle selection, and verbal analysis guide opinion, subtly determining whether a player is praised, criticized, or exonerated. The delay allows this guidance to occur before the audience can fully process the moment on its own terms. It is a form of invisible influence, a shaping of collective memory that is both immediate and lasting. I have interviewed producers who describe their role as not only conveying information, but constructing a narrative. Their choices, made within the window afforded by delay, determine what the public perceives as moral, strategic, or heroic. They select the frame, the replay speed, and the angle of emphasis. They time commentary to coincide with the replay in ways that highlight or mitigate behavior. In football, where milliseconds matter on the field, they also matter off it in shaping identity, judgment, and reputation. This interplay between studio, delay, and perception creates a complex ethical landscape. The delay is a powerful tool, allowing narratives to be constructed, modified, and reinforced before any independent interpretation can take hold. It demonstrates how public opinion, player legacy, and cultural memory are inseparable from the architecture of broadcast. Reputations are made in the studio, and the seconds of delay make it possible. The audience sees a version of reality shaped by technical precision, narrative design, and strategic commentary. Players perform, compete, and risk their bodies. But the studio and its control of time define the moral and cultural meaning of those actions. The interplay between field and broadcast creates a world in which perception and reality are rarely identical, yet both are inseparable in determining how the game is remembered and how players are judged. In football, memory is immediate, raw, and personal. Players feel every hit, every shift in momentum, every glance from the sideline. They are acutely aware of the dynamics on the field, the split-second calculations that guide every movement, and the physical consequences that accompany those decisions. They often learned what really happened, not from lived experience, but from a curated, delayed, and sometimes distorted version of events. Broadcast delay, designed to manage content, simultaneously reshaped reality itself. I spoke with several veterans who described the surreal experience of watching themselves play. One linebacker recounted an instance in which he believed he had executed a clean tackle. In the moment, he felt confident, certain he had maintained control and acted within the rules. Yet when the game aired, slowed down for replay and accompanied by expert commentary, the hit looked different. From the angle presented on television, the audience could perceive it as reckless, aggressive, or borderline illegal. The delay, by allowing commentary and slow-motion framing, transformed his memory into a public narrative he could not control. He had experienced one reality on the field, but the broadcast offered a different truth to the world. This disconnection between real-time experience and broadcast narrative created a new layer of psychological challenge. Players often have to reconcile their personal memory of an event with the mediated reality that millions of viewers consume. It is a subtle form of disorientation, where perception of self, action, and intention becomes intertwined with the mediated version of the event. The seconds of delay, combined with selective camera angles and commentary, produce a dual existence: the truth of the field and the truth of the broadcast. A quarterback described the phenomenon vividly. The interpretation of intent and risk on television differed from his lived reality. He realized that fans, analysts, and even potential future opponents would judge him by what they saw on a screen, not what he remembered feeling on the field. His perception of truth became mediated by broadcast delay. The discoordination between reality and broadcast extends to complex plays, collisions, and moments of chaos. On the field, dozens of decisions occur simultaneously, influenced by anticipation, instinct, and immediate pressure. In a stadium, players experience a dynamic mosaic of information, emotion, and tactile feedback. A single hit, pass, or tackle is extracted from context and reassembled in a narrative that fits the story the network wishes to tell. The seconds of delay allow for editing that aligns events with perception, often diverging from lived truth. One striking example occurred during a playoff game involving a tight end. He caught a critical pass, spun to evade multiple defenders, and believed he had avoided illegal contact. On television, however, a delayed replay highlighted a brush of the defender's helmet and an angle that made the movement appear borderline against the rules. The network's interpretation framed it as a tactical risk or minor violation. The player was stunned. His own experience was validated by teammates, yet public judgment had already been shaped by the mediated broadcast. Reality and perception had diverged, and the delay was the mechanism that created the gap. This discordance between field truth and broadcast truth has implications for personal accountability. Players are aware that their actions will be interpreted, judged, and remembered based on how they are presented, not only on what they do. The delay versus truth dynamic also influences career trajectories. Fans, sponsors, and even league officials may judge players on mediated perception. One controversial tackle, replayed and narrated in a specific way, can affect reputation, endorsement deals, or even Hall of Fame consideration. The seconds of delay are not just technical, they are cultural instruments that shape identity, opportunity, and legacy. In the end, broadcast delay creates a temporal and perceptual gap. Reality unfolds on the field, chaotic, unpredictable, and raw. The broadcast, delayed and framed, offers a version that is coherent, narratively satisfying, and emotionally directed. Players learn about themselves, their teammates, and their own mistakes through a lens they cannot fully control. They come to understand that public truth is not defined by memory or experience, but by what appears on screens. The seconds of delay are the invisible architects of perception. And within those seconds, reality and interpretation diverge in ways that will shape careers, reputations, and collective memory for years to come. In the controlled world of professional football broadcasts, delay is a safety net. It protects viewers from profanity, shields the league from controversy, and allows commentary to shape narrative before the audience reacts. Yet there are moments when that net fails. Moments where violence, injury, or raw emotion slip through the carefully calibrated system. When delay fails, the world sees what it was not supposed to see, and the consequences for players, leagues, and fans are immediate, visceral, and unforgettable. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon where a defensive lineman executed a hit so violent, it echoed through the stadium. In real time, the collision was terrifying. The quarterback crumpling under the impact, trainers rushing to the scene. The broadcast, operating under normal delay, was intended to allow the studio to manage the moment, frame the play, and mitigate public concern. But technical difficulties caused the sequence to air with minimal delay. Millions of viewers at home witnessed the full force of the hit before commentary could intervene. Shock rippled through living rooms across the nation. Fans gasped, social media erupted, and the league had no buffer to contextualize or explain. The safety net had failed. Players understand that these moments are rare but consequential. The hit appeared on national television almost unfiltered. Immediate speculation about intent, recklessness, and long-term injury flooded fan forums and headlines. Within seconds, perception became reality, and the player, who had acted instinctively, was forced to navigate public scrutiny he could neither anticipate nor control. Failures of delay reveal the power and fragility of the system. The league and networks rely on those seconds to manage morality, safety, and emotion. When that layer is bypassed, the raw truth confronts audiences unfiltered. Fans, conditioned to trust the broadcast as a curated experience, react with shock, outrage, or fear. The result is often an amplification of emotion that feels disproportionate to the play itself. The system's failure exposes the human cost of professional football in ways that sanitized broadcasts rarely do. One of the most notable examples occurred during a nationally televised game where a brawl broke out between two teams after a late hit. Many players have recounted being shocked at how different raw broadcasts can feel compared to their lived experience. In the stadium, a hit might feel significant but fleeting, adrenaline tempering the perception of danger. On television, when broadcast delay fails or is minimized, viewers see every microsecond slowed, every angle amplified, and every consequence highlighted. Players suddenly confront a version of their actions that is more intense, more violent, and often more morally charged than they ever experienced firsthand. The discrepancy between memory and broadcast becomes stark. Injury, particularly, exposes the limits of delay. Concussions, fractures, and ligament tears happen in milliseconds. In many cases, delayed broadcasts allow commentators to frame injuries, explain medical context, and guide audience reaction to maintain composure. When delay fails, the audience sees suffering in its rawest form. One running back described a moment when he tore his ACL during a televised game. The network, unable to buffer or contextualize due to an equipment malfunction, aired the injury nearly live. When delay fails, the fragility of that system is starkly visible. Athletes perform within a controlled environment, aware that public perception is partially sculpted by delay. When that layer of mediation is removed, the illusion of live experience collides with raw reality, producing shock, debate, and moral questioning. It is a reminder that even the most sophisticated systems are vulnerable to error, and that raw truth is both powerful and disruptive. In the rare instances when delay fails, the consequences ripple across multiple dimensions. Player reputations can be altered instantaneously. League officials must respond swiftly to manage both perception and safety concerns. Commentary teams scramble to provide context retroactively, often emphasizing explanation over narrative. Social media reacts immediately, magnifying both fact and speculation. The seconds meant to control narrative are gone, and reality moves forward unfiltered, leaving players, networks, and the public to reconcile perception with truth. For athletes, these moments are a stark reminder of their dual existence. They inhabit the reality of the field with all its physical and emotional immediacy. Simultaneously, they exist in the mediated reality of broadcast, commentary, and delay, where seconds of curation shape perception, memory, and judgment. When delay fails, the mediated version collapses, and players confront the full force of unfiltered visibility. It is a rare and often disorienting experience, but it reveals the profound power that the controlled seconds of delay normally wield. failures of delay illuminate the tension between spectacle and control. Football is designed for drama, risk, and conflict. Yet the league and networks work to manage those elements for public consumption. When the safety net collapses, the audience glimpses the full, unmediated intensity of the sport. It is in these rare, exposed moments that the human cost, emotional stakes, and moral complexity of football become undeniable. Players, fans, and leagues alike are reminded of the fragile boundary between curated perception and raw reality. These instances also leave lasting impressions on memory and culture. Fans recall moments with a clarity and intensity that mediated plays rarely achieve. Broadcast delay is a constant, quiet presence in the NFL, shaping emotion, narrative, and memory. Its failures are rare, but when they occur, they are instructive. For decades, broadcast delay allowed the NFL and networks to exercise subtle control over narrative. A few seconds were enough to frame plays, manage outrage, and shape reputations before fans could fully react. In the controlled environment of television, perception could be guided, replay angles curated, and commentary synced to reinforce intended interpretation. That world existed largely uninterrupted until social media emerged, bringing with it a new, unfiltered form of real-time documentation. Suddenly, the carefully constructed illusion of broadcast control was vulnerable to anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection. I have spoken to players who describe this shift as both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly, a controversial hit, a personal foul, or an off-field altercation could be captured by fans and uploaded before the studio had even processed the play. Moments that were once curated for mass consumption could now exist outside the league as carefully managed narrative. Social media democratized perspective, introducing multiple angles, alternative interpretations, and immediate public reaction. For the first time, broadcast delay could be circumvented and the consequences were profound. Consider a Monday night game where a defensive lineman made a tackle that, according to the official broadcast, appeared textbook and within the rules. Fans in the stadium, however, recorded the same play from different vantage points. Within minutes, videos circulated on Twitter and Instagram, showing that the quarterback had been hit in a way that looked late and potentially dangerous. The studio's replay and commentary, designed to soften perception, were rendered secondary. Millions of viewers now had access to alternative realities, and the NFL's control over narrative was compromised. The seconds of delay no longer guaranteed narrative authority. Players quickly learned that social media could validate or contradict the version of reality presented by official broadcasts. A quarterback's reputation for poor decision-making could be amplified if fan videos highlighted a subtle misstep overlooked by the studio. Conversely, a defensive player whose tackle appeared reckless on the broadcast might find vindication in footage captured from another angle. The stakes were enormous. Careers, public opinion, and even league discipline could now be influenced by real-time fan documentation. Broadcast delay remained, but its power to shape perception was diminished. The speed of social media accelerated this tension. While networks relied on seconds, sometimes even a full minute, to frame a play, social media could disseminate clips within moments. Analysts, journalists, and fans engaged in rapid discussion, often forming collective judgment before the official narrative was established. For players, this meant that reputational outcomes were no longer determined solely by professional production teams, but by a decentralized, unpredictable audience. The illusion of mediated control was under constant threat. This shift has implications beyond perception. Social media has forced leagues to react more quickly to monitor multiple sources and to contend with fragmented interpretations of events. One linebacker recounted an incident where he delivered a controversial hit. The official broadcast, delayed and framed, emphasized legality and intent. Meanwhile, videos uploaded from multiple fan perspectives presented angles that appeared reckless or dangerous. Within 10 minutes, social media was flooded with opinion, critique, and debate. League officials were compelled to respond publicly, and the narrative of the play was no longer fully under the NFL's control. The seconds that once allowed narrative mediation had become insufficient. Players themselves must now navigate dual realities in even more complex ways. Not only do they contend with the mediated truth of broadcast, but they also exist in the unfiltered ecosystem of social media. One wide receiver described watching fan videos immediately after a game, realizing that every action, minor or significant, could be interpreted in ways they did not anticipate. Social media broke the illusion that broadcast delay could protect them from public judgment, and the psychological weight of this new reality was substantial. Social media has also shifted the dynamics of fan perception. Previously, fans experienced the curated broadcast as the authoritative version of reality. One notable example involved a playoff game in which a late hit appeared ambiguous on television. Commentary emphasized intent, contextualizing the contact as unavoidable. Within moments, fans posted clips from sideline cameras showing a slightly different sequence. Social media users dissected the angles, slowed frames, and shared commentary, creating a narrative that conflicted with the studio's explanation. The league, watching public reaction unfold in real time, was forced to respond quickly, balancing disciplinary action with the evolving narrative online. Broadcast delay had become reactive rather than preventative, a tool no longer sufficient to shape perception unilaterally. The advent of social media also challenges the psychological security that players once found in broadcast delay. Athletes are aware that fans, coaches, and sponsors can form opinions before the narrative is officially presented. In this new landscape, perception becomes immediate, fragmented, and often contradictory. Players must now anticipate not only the official broadcast narrative, but also the multiple unofficial versions that will circulate in real time. Reputation, legacy, and public understanding are no longer solely influenced by controlled production, but by an unpredictable, decentralized network of viewers. In essence, social media has democratized the broadcast. It has shifted the authority from centralized control in the studio to the collective judgment of millions. Players, fans, and the league itself must contend with a new paradigm in which narrative authority is fractured. Perception is immediate, and memory is mediated by multiple, sometimes conflicting sources. Players operate under unprecedented scrutiny, aware that every moment can be captured, shared, and analyzed from multiple perspectives. Broadcast delay remains a tool, but it is no longer sufficient to control outrage, manage perception, or shape reputation unilaterally. Social media has permanently altered the power dynamic between reality, narrative, and public perception in professional football. In reflecting on this shift, I understand that social media does not simply break the illusion of control. It creates a new layer of truth, interpretation, and consequence. Players experience dual realities: the curated narrative delivered through official broadcasts and the decentralized, immediate perception shaped by fan-generated content. The seconds of delay, once a buffer of narrative authority, now coexist with a constant stream of unfiltered perspectives. The mediated version of reality is challenged, reframed, and sometimes contradicted within moments of play. The interplay between delay and social media underscores a fundamental truth about modern professional football. Narrative, reputation, and perception are no longer dictated solely by field performance or official commentary. They are now the product of a dynamic, multi-layered system in which millions of eyes, perspectives, and interpretations operate in real time. Broadcast delay is still significant, but it has been supplemented, disrupted, and occasionally rendered irrelevant by the immediacy and democratization of social media. The illusion of control is gone, replaced by a constantly shifting ecosystem where truth, perception, and judgment coexist in complex tension. In the early days of professional football, broadcast delay served a singular, almost unquestioned purpose: control the league and network's curated perception, shielding audiences from profanity, violent collisions, and moments that might provoke outrage. Fans accepted the mediated reality because there were few alternatives. They trusted the broadcast as an authoritative account of what happened on the field. That trust was implicit, rooted in the scarcity of perspectives and the authority of official sources. Today, that paradigm is no longer sustainable. The rise of social media, fan-generated video, and public expectation for transparency has created a new battlefield, one defined by the tension between curated narrative and raw authenticity. Players, coaches, and executives have all recognized this shift. Fans now demand access to unfiltered moments. They want to see plays from angles beyond what the official broadcast provides. They want to witness the split-second decisions, the collisions, and the human elements in their entirety. Authenticity has become a currency, and viewers are willing to search for it, bypassing traditional broadcasts when necessary. This represents a profound challenge to the controlled environment that the NFL built for decades. Players understand the stakes. They recognize that their reputations, careers, and public perception are increasingly influenced by how authenticity is portrayed. One veteran safety described an incident where a tackle appeared reckless in official replay, but looked perfectly clean in fan-generated footage captured from the sideline. The discrepancy created tension between the narrative being delivered by the broadcast and the narrative circulating online. Players must now navigate this dual reality, where reputation can be simultaneously praised, condemned, or debated depending on which perspective reaches viewers first. Broadcast delay is no longer a guaranteed safeguard. The league's resistance to full transparency is not arbitrary. Raw footage can amplify controversy, increase legal liability, and fuel criticism of player safety protocols. It exposes the unpredictability, violence, and human error that the NFL prefers to manage through narrative curation. Yet fans are increasingly unwilling to accept filtered realities as definitive. They recognize that delayed, edited, and framed broadcasts provide only a partial truth. Authenticity in the eyes of the audience is the unvarnished account, the complete sequence, and the unmediated moment. This struggle also intersects with social media. Fans can immediately capture, share, and analyze moments that may contradict the official narrative. A single smartphone clip can undermine the curated story, validate or refute commentary, and shape collective perception faster than the studio can react. The implications for players are profound. They must consider not only their performance on the field, but also how it will be interpreted across multiple platforms, angles, and timeframes. They must anticipate scrutiny from traditional broadcasts and unfiltered fan footage alike. Careers can be shaped by which version of reality dominates public perception. Players who once relied on the seconds of delay to buffer public judgment now face an environment where every action is potentially visible, analyzed, and contested immediately. The demand for authenticity has transformed the temporal and perceptual landscape of the sport. At the same time, the pursuit of raw footage has broader cultural significance. It signals a shift in audience expectation, a movement toward transparency and accountability in professional sports. Fans want to witness the humanity of athletes, the danger of collisions, and the unpredictability of competition. They recognize that curated broadcasts, while polished and narratively satisfying, often omit context, subtlety, and nuance. Authenticity is a lens through which fans reconcile the spectacle of professional football with the reality of human action and consequence. The battle over authenticity is not limited to perception. It extends into league policy, media strategy, and social dynamics. The NFL must balance fan expectations, player welfare, and legal considerations. Every decision about what to broadcast, delay, or edit carries consequences for trust, engagement, and public opinion. Fans, empowered by technology, exert pressure that the league cannot ignore. Players experience both the benefits and risks of this transparency, understanding that authenticity can elevate or imperil their reputations in ways that curated broadcasts once controlled. They also understand that seconds of delay remain necessary for safety, content moderation, and legal compliance. In reflecting on this dynamic, I see a fundamental transformation. Broadcast delay, once an invisible mechanism of control, now exists in tension with social media, fan expectation, and the cultural demand for authenticity. The league, players, and audience all inhabit a landscape where perception, judgment, and reputation are contested in real time. Seconds of delay are no longer a guarantee of narrative authority. They are a tool in a broader struggle over who controls truth, interpretation, and public memory. The league mediates, reacts, and manages, but it no longer dictates unilaterally. The battle for authenticity defines modern football, reshaping perception, narrative, and memory in ways that were unimaginable before the digital age. This is the new frontier of perception. The seconds of delay, once a protective buffer and narrative instrument, now compete with instantaneous dissemination of multiple realities. Players, networks, and the league itself must contend with a complex interplay of mediated truth, unfiltered footage, and audience expectation. Authenticity is no longer optional. It is demanded, debated, and verified in real time. Broadcast delay remains a tool, but it is now one element among many in a constantly shifting ecosystem of perception, judgment, and memory. In football, referees operate in an environment defined by instant decision-making, high stakes, and immense scrutiny. Their role is to interpret, enforce, and manage the rules in real time, often under immense physical and psychological pressure. Every whistle blown, every hand signal made, every call adjudicated occurs within seconds. Yet the consequences can linger for years. What complicates this further is the mediated world of broadcast delay. Seconds, seemingly negligible in their technical function, have profound effects on how officiating is perceived, critiqued, and remembered by fans, analysts, and even players themselves. Referees do not operate in a vacuum. Their work unfolds in the same space as players, coaches, and fans. Yet the lens through which their actions are publicly evaluated is often delayed, edited, and framed. A call that happens in real time is already experienced by the stadium in its raw, chaotic context. In living rooms across the country, viewers process that same moment through the filtered medium of television, where delay, replay, and commentary add layers of interpretation. A late whistle, an unexpected flag, or a nuanced judgment is magnified, slowed, or emphasized in ways that can radically alter public perception. I spoke with several veteran referees who described the dissonance between their lived experience and the mediated truth of broadcast. On the field, he had a clear line of sight and made a judgment based on positioning, movement, and timing. One referee described feeling a profound sense of alienation, realizing that their professional competence was being judged based on a representation that lagged behind real time, sometimes out of context and often interpreted through emotional or partisan lenses. Timing is another critical factor. Delayed broadcasts can heighten perceived controversy. A borderline call may seem egregious if replayed from multiple angles, slowed, and paired with commentary that frames the action as questionable. Fans' reactions, social media discourse, and journalistic analysis often occur in parallel, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the perception of error. Referees find themselves navigating a complex landscape where the timing of broadcast, public reaction, and league statements interacts to shape long-lasting reputations. The seconds of delay, intended to mediate perception, sometimes magnify the very controversies they were designed to soften. Public reaction is not limited to critiques of fairness or accuracy. Broadcast delay affects perception of intent, professionalism, and character. One official shared an experience during a nationally televised game where a questionable roughing the passer call was replayed from several angles, accompanied by commentary, questioning, judgment, and composure. Fans, seeing the replay without context, attributed malice or incompetence to the call. The referee was suddenly defined in public perception by seconds of curated narrative rather than by his extensive troupy experience and on-field reasoning. Delay, combined with replay framing, transformed a moment of professional judgment into a moral evaluation of character. The psychological weight on referees is considerable. When broadcast delay enters the equation, the temporal buffer that might allow reasoned understanding instead becomes a tool for amplified scrutiny. Slow-motion replay, paired with delayed commentary, creates a perception that officials act with deliberateness rather than instinct, with error rather than judgment. Referees internalize this scrutiny, knowing that every call may be dissected long after the whistle, often in ways that distort the lived reality of their decision-making. Case studies illustrate this vividly. During a high-stakes championship game, a holding penalty was called on an offensive lineman at a critical moment. In the stadium, the call felt routine and aligned with the flow of play. Broadcast delay allowed the moment to be replayed several times, highlighting angles that exaggerated the appearance of infraction. Commentary framed the decision as pivotal, influencing both perception and narrative. Social media amplified the critique instantly. The referee's reputation, constructed through these seconds of mediated interpretation, became a central topic of conversation, demonstrating the influence of delay on public judgment of officiating. Delay also interacts with league response. Officials' actions are often evaluated internally, but when the broadcast narrative generates public controversy, league communications are forced to react. By providing a few seconds to buffer controversial moments, broadcasts allow commentary to frame judgment, explain reasoning, or highlight mitigating context. The seconds of broadcast delay, while technical in origin, carry profound implications for how referees are understood and remembered. Their careers, credibility, and public persona are influenced not just by what they do, but by how those actions are framed in time and perception. In reflecting on this dynamic, it is clear that broadcast delay is a double-edged tool that can protect, contextualize, and mediate. It can also magnify, distort, and reframe. The seconds between action and broadcast may seem inconsequential, but for referees, they define the boundary between perception and truth. For players, fans, and officials alike, these seconds hold disproportionate weight. They mediate not only perception, but reputation, legacy, and collective memory in the sport. In the end, understanding the impact of delay on referees illuminates a central truth about professional football. Every aspect of the game performance, injury, controversy, and judgment is now subject to temporal mediation. Decisions once evaluated in the immediacy of play are now filtered through the seconds of delay, replay, and commentary. For referees, this means that their authority, judgment, and reputation are continuously negotiated between field reality and public perception, a negotiation in which the seconds of delay are both a shield and a lens, shaping understanding long after the whistle has blown. In professional football, broadcast delay is rarely just a technical feature. It is a business decision. The seconds, seemingly trivial in isolation, are part of a larger framework designed to manage perception, maximize revenue, and structure the emotional arc of a broadcast. Networks and leagues have long recognized that football is not merely a sport. It is a product packaged for consumption, monetization, and mass appeal. Every pause, replay, and frame is calibrated to balance viewer engagement, sponsorship obligations, and public sentiment. Delay, in this context, becomes a strategic tool that shapes the commercial reality of the game. The economics behind delay are multifaceted. Advertising is central. Commercials are sold on the premise of predictable audience attention. And the pacing of a broadcast must accommodate breaks, transitions, and suspense. Seconds of delay allow producers to structure the narrative rhythm in a way that optimizes engagement. A dramatic play can be buffered, followed by commentary and slow-motion replay before cutting to a commercial break that capitalizes on peak attention. The artificial timing created by delay is an invisible hand guiding the viewer's experience, ensuring that commercial partners receive maximum exposure at moments of heightened emotional investment. Beyond advertising, delay serves to manage the broadcast's emotional arc. Football is a sport of tension, anticipation, and release. The crowd reacts instantly, but the home audience experiences mediated suspense. Delays allow producers to structure that suspense, enhancing the drama of close calls, pivotal plays, or controversial incidents. A hit that might feel jarring in real time can be slowed, replayed, and framed to heighten impact or minimize shock, shaping the emotional journey of the audience. In this way, delay is inseparable from the storytelling of professional football. It is a business tool precisely because it manages attention, engagement, and emotional response. The NFL and its broadcast partners recognize that perception drives loyalty, ratings, and revenue. Every second of delay provides control over the narrative, allowing strategic decisions about what is shown, how it is shown, and when it is shown. A late hit or injury, for example, can be buffered to prevent immediate public outrage, preserving the emotional cohesion of the broadcast. Plays that might provoke anger or criticism can be recontextualized with commentary or replay angles before the audience has fully absorbed the event. In this way, delay functions as both a protective mechanism for the league's image and a commercial instrument for maximizing engagement and satisfaction. Consider the relationship between delay and sponsorship. Advertisers purchase exposure at key moments, betting that viewer attention will be highest during pivotal plays, scoring opportunities, or dramatic collisions. Seconds of delay allow producers to align these moments with commercial breaks and sponsored segments, increasing the effectiveness of marketing investment. Without delay, the timing of these events would be unpredictable, potentially diminishing the value of advertising contracts. In this sense, broadcast delay is an economic strategy designed to harmonize the chaos of the sport with the precision required by commercial imperatives. Delay also impacts pacing. Football broadcasts are complex orchestras of camera angles, commentary, replay, and graphics. Seconds of delay allow producers to synchronize these elements, creating a cohesive, emotionally engaging product. A controversial call can be buffered, a slow-motion replay inserted, and commentary added to frame the moment before the audience reacts. This coordination is essential for maintaining narrative clarity, guiding emotional investment, and sustaining viewer attention. From a business perspective, pacing and control are directly tied to ratings, retention, and ultimately, revenue. Every second of delay is leveraged to optimize the economic and emotional outcomes of the broadcast. Furthermore, delay provides contingency. Networks must anticipate unexpected events, from injuries to confrontations, and have a window to respond. A few seconds can be used to cut audio, mask profanity, or reframe a moment before it reaches millions of viewers. This is not merely a protective measure. It is a calculated business decision. By controlling what the audience sees and when, the league and broadcasters reduce risk to their brand, protect advertisers' interests, and manage fan engagement. Delay, in this sense, is a buffer that preserves both economic and reputational capital. The economics of delay extend to content ownership and narrative control. Highlight reels, post-game analysis, and sports journalism often rely on the curated feed provided by official broadcasts. Seconds of delay ensure that these materials are framed, timed, and packaged in ways that reinforce the league's preferred narrative. The NFL monetizes this curated content through licensing, highlights, and media partnerships. The delay, though technical in origin, functions as a commercial instrument, shaping the value of intellectual property and the public perception that drives it. Players are aware, even if implicitly, of the economic dimension of delay. They understand that certain moments are emphasized, replayed, or omitted, not only for narrative or safety reasons, but because they influence ratings, sponsorship exposure, and broadcast strategy. A quarterback's controversial throw may be slowed, replayed, and analyzed to heighten drama, generating discussion and attention that boosts ratings. Likewise, a defensive penalty may be minimized or framed contextually to prevent distraction from advertising and pacing objectives. Players operate in a mediated reality where performance, perception, and economic strategy intersect in ways they cannot fully control. The business dimension of delay also shapes league policy. Broadcast contracts are some of the most lucrative in professional sports, and the seconds of delay embedded in production are part of the bargain. Networks purchase rights with the understanding that content will be curated, paced, and controlled to optimize engagement. The league negotiates these arrangements with an awareness that delay protects the value of the broadcast, shields sponsors from controversy, and preserves the narrative that sustains fan loyalty. Delay is economic leverage embedded in every decision about what reaches the audience and when. This is not to suggest that delay is purely manipulative. It is also pragmatic, a tool for managing the unpredictable nature of live sport. Football unfolds in real time, with collisions, confrontations, and human error. Seconds of delay allow broadcasters to manage chaos, maintain continuity, and create a product that is consumable by millions. Yet this practical function is inseparable from the business function. Every technical buffer serves economic ends, and every decision about pacing, replay, and commentary is made with an eye toward ratings, engagement, and revenue. Delay is both operational necessity and commercial strategy. In reflecting on the economic role of delay, it becomes clear that perception, narrative, and profit are deeply intertwined. The seconds between action and broadcast are a tool for shaping emotional response, controlling audience interpretation, and optimizing commercial outcomes. Fans experience drama, tension, and suspense in a mediated rhythm designed as much for entertainment as for economic efficiency. Players' reputations, referees' credibility, and league image are all influenced by this orchestration. The business decisions behind delay define the temporal and perceptual reality of professional football as much as any rule or play. Broadcast delay, when viewed through an economic lens, is therefore a strategic instrument. It shapes how the game is presented, how it is experienced, and how it is monetized. It allows networks and the league to synchronize drama with advertising, pace with suspense, and controversy with narrative. Every second of delay is a deliberate choice, a business calculation, and a tool for shaping the emotional and financial dynamics of professional football. It demonstrates that behind the apparent spontaneity of live sport lies a meticulously orchestrated system designed to protect, profit, and engage. Understanding delay as a business decision provides insight into the broader ecosystem of professional football. The game is not only played on the field. It is performed in the minds of viewers, choreographed through seconds of timing, replay, and narrative curation. Every collision, penalty, or highlight is embedded in a framework designed to maximize attention, preserve reputation, and optimize revenue. Delay is the invisible engine of this system, aligning technical function with economic strategy and audience perception in a continuous, interdependent process. There is a fundamental psychological divide in professional football created by broadcast delay. Fans believe they are witnessing reality in real time, that every hit, catch, and misstep occurs in the precise instant they observe it. Yet players, coaches, referees, and league officials know that this perception is mediated. Seconds, sometimes barely noticeable, separate the truth of the field from the broadcast truth experienced at home. That gap is not merely technical. It is psychological, shaping empathy, judgment, and understanding in ways that most viewers never consciously recognize. Players have a heightened awareness of this divide. They live every moment of the game in unfiltered immediacy. They feel the impact of collisions, the weight of missteps, and the speed of judgment in a way that no broadcast, no matter how precise, can fully convey. They understand how sequences unfold, the context of decisions, and the split-second intentions behind every action. Fans, by contrast, interpret what they see through the lens of replay, commentary, and delay. Their perception is curated, incomplete, and often emotionally amplified. The psychological divide is thus not merely a technical artifact. It is a difference in lived experience, shaping understanding and empathy across the spectator divide. Consider the impact on public empathy for injuries. A player may sustain a hard hit and immediately experience pain, shock, and disorientation. In the stadium, this is apparent to those present. Paramedics, teammates, and coaches respond instantly. The broadcast, delayed by seconds and often edited for content, delivers a version of the event that frames it emotionally and morally. Slow-motion replay, commentary, and selective angles can either heighten the perceived brutality or soften it for viewers. Fans at home may react with outrage, sympathy, or judgment, yet their response is contingent on how delay mediates their perception. The player's real experience, immediate and physical, is often obscured, creating a psychological gap between observer and observed. This gap extends to perception of intent. A controversial tackle, a late hit, or a borderline penalty may look deliberate when slowed, replayed, and framed with critical commentary. Fans, interpreting the moment without the context of speed, angle, or situational awareness, may assign blame, motive, or malice. Players, in contrast, understand the rapid, split-second nature of their actions. The seconds of broadcast delay amplify misperception, creating a psychological distance in which the reality of intent is divorced from its perceived meaning. This divide has tangible consequences for public judgment, player reputation, and fan empathy. The psychological divide also influences narratives around success and failure. A quarterback's fumble, an offensive line breakdown, or a dropped pass can be dissected in delayed replay, slowed to highlight minor errors that were nearly imperceptible in real time. Fans consume these moments as judgment, assigning responsibility and moral weight to split-second events. Players, experiencing the sequence in context, understand that judgment is contingent on speed, positioning, and circumstance. Delay converts technical, fleeting events into amplified, permanent narratives, creating a chasm between lived reality and mediated perception. Social media intensifies this divide. Fans posting clips, commentary, and slow-motion breakdowns contribute to a collective interpretation of events, often occurring before official narratives are established. The psychological effect is profound. Audiences internalize mediated perception as reality, reacting emotionally to curated moments while the players involved are processing experience, consequence, and impact in real time. The delay that once allowed controlled framing now contributes to a persistent gap between what is observed and what is experienced. The audience sees, interprets, and judges with a temporality that is artificially constructed. Players describe the cognitive dissonance of this divide in stark terms. One veteran wide receiver recounted a collision in which he absorbed the force of another player while protecting the quarterback. He experienced pain, balance disruption, and immediate judgment calls in microseconds. Fans watching at home, however, received the moment framed by delay, replayed in slow motion, and annotated by commentary, emphasizing aggression. The viewer's emotional response diverged from the player's lived reality. The seconds of delay created not only a temporal buffer, but a psychological disconnect, shaping empathy, understanding, and reaction. This divide affects more than individual moments. It shapes collective perception of the game. Public understanding of player conduct, safety, and skill is mediated by delay. Incidents that feel routine, justified, or strategic in real time are often perceived as reckless, malicious, or controversial in broadcast. Fans' moral and emotional judgments are influenced less by lived reality and more by curated presentation, commentary, and selective replay. Delay becomes a filter not only for content but for psychological response, shaping empathy, outrage, and admiration in ways largely invisible to viewers. Referees are also affected by this divide. Calls that appear incorrect or biased in delayed replay are often judged harshly by fans who cannot access the immediate context of the play. The psychological effect extends to officials' reputations, reinforcing a sense that perception, rather than procedural correctness, governs judgment. For players and referees alike, the gap between lived experience and mediated perception creates a persistent tension, in which seconds of delay alter not only perception, but moral evaluation. The divide is particularly evident in high-stakes situations. Playoff games, nationally televised events, and moments of extreme consequence are replayed repeatedly, framed narratively, and accompanied by expert commentary. Fans interpret these moments emotionally and morally, often assigning intent or blame based on fragmented information. Players, immersed in real-time decision-making, understand nuance, pressure, and context. Delay converts action into narrative, intention into perception, and split-second judgment into moral evaluation, creating a lasting psychological divide between those on the field and those observing from afar. This phenomenon is not merely academic. It shapes how players are remembered, how controversies are evaluated, and how the league manages its public image. Delay constructs a mediated reality in which empathy, judgment, and understanding are filtered, amplified, or diminished. Fans' emotional responses are shaped by seconds of mediation, and players navigate a world in which public perception is often decoupled from lived experience. The psychological divide created by broadcast delay is central to understanding the cultural and human dynamics of professional football. The effect extends into legacy. Players' careers, reputations, and public narratives are shaped by moments viewed through delayed broadcast. Professional football is a spectacle not only of athletic prowess, but of human drama, and scandals are as integral to its cultural mythology as touchdowns and tackles. Yet the story that reaches the public is rarely the unvarnished truth of the moment. Broadcast delay, originally instituted for practical and legal reasons, became a tool that shaped scandals, determining whether they erupted explosively, simmered slowly, or were softened for consumption. Seconds of mediation alter perception, intensity, and moral judgment, turning ordinary controversies into headline events, or, conversely, muffling incidents that might otherwise provoke outrage. Consider the timing of confrontations on the field. A late hit, an unprovoked shove, or a heated exchange between players can appear entirely different when filtered through seconds of broadcast delay. Slow-motion replay, camera angle selection, and commentary interact with this delay to create narratives that may exaggerate intent or diminish culpability. A tackle that seemed marginal in real time can be portrayed as egregious in replay. Fans watching at home, removed from the immediacy and context of the field, interpret actions as deliberate, reckless, or unsportsmanlike. Delay acts as a narrative amplifier, enhancing the drama of incidents and shaping public perception in ways that can have long-lasting consequences for players and teams. A controversial incident in a nationally televised game can be buffered, allowing producers to insert commentary, frame perspectives, and control the visual narrative before the public reacts. Conversely, delay can amplify scandal. A controversial hit, a public confrontation, or an in-game fight may be replayed repeatedly from multiple angles, each second emphasizing aggression or severity. Commentary synchronized with replay can frame the incident as deliberate, egregious, or emblematic of broader issues in the league. Social media, reacting to the broadcast, further magnifies perception. Often before players or teams have the opportunity to explain context or intent. The seconds of delay that allow narrative control can, paradoxically, heighten moral outrage, intensifying scandal rather than mitigating it. Timing is particularly critical in incidents involving injury or player safety. A concussion, a severe tackle, or an apparent foul that causes harm is experienced differently by those on the field than by viewers at home. Fans, seeing the delayed replay with commentary emphasizing brutality or recklessness, interpret the moment in moral terms. The league, aware of this, often structures replay and commentary to guide perception, presenting a buffered version of events that balances transparency with reputational protection. Delay here acts as a mediator between human consequence and public narrative, influencing both empathy and outrage. Scandals are also shaped by the absence of footage. Delay allows producers to filter what is broadcast, choosing which angles or sequences to emphasize and which to obscure. Moments that could have intensified criticism may be omitted, while others are highlighted for dramatic effect. This selective visibility transforms incidents into curated narratives, guiding public understanding in ways that are invisible to viewers. Players live the full reality of events, yet the mediated record, delayed and framed, becomes the story that defines public memory. Several high-profile controversies illustrate this effect. On-field confrontations between players often appear more deliberate or severe when delayed, replayed and analyzed from multiple angles. Conversely, incidents that might have sparked outrage are sometimes softened through editorial choices enabled by delay, presenting context, mitigating commentary, and emphasizing other aspects of the game. In both cases, delay functions as an instrument of narrative control, shaping which aspects of human behavior are amplified, diminished, or morally judged. The social implications are profound. Fans, interpreting scandal through delayed broadcast, internalize mediated perception as reality. Reputation, public opinion, and even league policy are influenced by seconds of narrative mediation. Players must navigate not only the immediate consequences of their actions, but the delayed cultural interpretation, which can affect endorsements, career trajectory, and social judgment. Delay is therefore a powerful determinant of how scandals unfold, how reputations are constructed, and how moral narratives are codified in the public consciousness. Media coverage of scandals also reflects the influence of delay. Highlight reels, post-game analysis, and news segments often rely on the buffered broadcast feed. Seconds of mediation, replay, and commentary shape these narratives, influencing journalistic interpretation and public discourse. A moment that was fleeting in real time can be expanded into a dramatic episode, reframed to fit a storyline, and reinforced through repeated coverage. Delay, in this sense, is both temporal and narrative architecture, structuring how scandals are understood, remembered, and debated. Scandals that intersect with league politics, officiating, or historical context are particularly sensitive to delay. A controversial play involving a star player may be replayed with a focus on reputation, league history, or ongoing controversies. Fans viewing these moments without the immediacy of context interpret the incident as evidence of patterns, intent, or systemic issues. Delay amplifies the storytelling potential, influencing perception across demographics, geographic regions, and social networks. Players experience reality directly, yet their reputations are constructed by mediated representation. in a sport defined by physicality, competition, and emotional intensity. The seconds of broadcast delay wield power over both perception and consequence. Understanding how delay shapes scandals illuminates a broader truth about professional football. The sport is not only played on the field, but curated in time for public consumption. Reputation, outrage, and moral evaluation are filtered through seconds of mediation that are imperceptible to fans, but consequential for players. Delay transforms isolated moments into cultural touchstones, narrative drivers, and historical records, demonstrating that perception is as carefully managed as performance. Delay, in the context of scandal, is both weapon and shield, shaping the moral and cultural narrative of professional football in profound and lasting ways. Professional football exists not only as a game of athleticism, but as a spectacle deeply intertwined with media, narrative, and perception. The seconds of broadcast delay, originally designed for safety and censorship, became instruments of control. They allowed the league to shape what millions of viewers witnessed, filtering out profanity, violence, or controversial moments, and curating the emotional arc of every game. Yet over the past 2 decades, growing tension has emerged a struggle between league control and the demand for transparency. This battle is fought across airwaves, social media, and stadium sidelines. As journalists, players, and fans contend with the consequences of delayed and mediated reality, journalists occupy a critical role in this struggle. For decades, sports reporting relied on the official broadcast as the primary source of footage and context. Seconds of delay allowed networks to frame narratives, emphasize or omit details, and construct stories that were often more aligned with league interests than with the unvarnished reality of the field. Investigative reporters, however, began to push back. They sought to uncover the moments hidden or altered by delay, to provide context that the league's curated feed could not convey, and to challenge the sanitized narratives that shaped public perception. Transparency became both an ethical imperative and a journalistic mission, aimed at revealing the truth behind the carefully managed broadcast. The struggle for transparency is not abstract. Is grounded in real cases. On-field altercations that were minimized or framed through delay have been re-examined by journalists using alternative footage, player interviews, and sideline recordings. These investigations expose discrepancies between what the public believed and what occurred in real time, challenging the league's ability to control narrative. High-profile investigations into player injuries, disciplinary decisions, and controversial officiating have demonstrated the tension between official broadcast, control, and the journalistic imperative to reveal the unfiltered truth. Delay, once a shield, became a point of scrutiny. Players themselves became advocates for transparency. They understood that their reputations were shaped by seconds of delayed narrative, often portraying them as villains, heroes, or reckless actors based on curated footage. Social media empowered athletes to bypass traditional broadcast filters. Posting clips, providing context and offering their perspectives directly to millions of followers. In doing so, they challenged the league's narrative authority, demanding that the world see the truth of the game as they experienced it. This shift altered the dynamics of control, making transparency a player-driven movement as much as a journalistic one. This is particularly evident in situations involving injury or disciplinary action, where seconds of delay previously determined the narrative. By exposing the gap between lived reality and broadcast reality, transparency restores context, allowing audiences to evaluate events more fairly and empathetically. Every second of unmediated footage risks reputational damage, public outrage, and challenges to authority. Yet the proliferation of personal devices, fan recordings, and social media platforms has made complete control impossible. Interviews, side-by-side comparisons, and unedited footage reveal intent, context, and nuance that seconds of delay previously obscured. In doing so, they challenge the historical record of their careers, altering how fans, analysts, and future historians understand key moments. Transparency thus serves both moral and professional functions, reshaping the cultural and historical memory of the sport. The psychological implications of this fight are significant. Fans accustomed to mediated reality must recalibrate their understanding. A play that seemed egregious or malicious when framed through delayed broadcast may reveal itself to be accidental, strategic, or misinterpreted. Journalists and players act as mediators, bridging the gap between perception and reality. Delay, once an invisible architect of moral and emotional judgment, is increasingly scrutinized, questioned, and deconstructed, transforming the psychological experience of the game. Social media accelerates this process. Clips circulated online, often captured from multiple angles and without delay, provide audiences with immediate access to raw footage. Fan analysis, commentary, and discussion proliferate in real time, challenging the curated narrative of official broadcasts. In this environment, transparency is not simply a journalistic or player-driven initiative. It becomes a social imperative. Delayed broadcast can no longer dictate perception as it once did, and the league is forced to adapt to an ecosystem where narrative control is shared, contested, and decentralized. . Yet broadcast delay quietly undermines this perception. Every touchdown, collision, or controversial call that reaches living rooms across the nation is already framed, filtered, and sometimes altered. The sport, as it is consumed by the public, is a constructed narrative rather than a direct reflection of action. Intent is interpreted, character assessed, and morality judged based on what is presented rather than what actually occurred. Players who live the sequence in context often confront a public perception that is disconnected from lived reality. Delay turns fleeting events into enduring narratives, permanently shaping how athletes are remembered, admired, or vilified. The broadcast becomes the reality, and the temporal gap ensures that the public experiences a version of truth mediated by seconds. Moments are replayed, slowed, and framed to emphasize drama, controversy, or heroism. Each repetition solidifies perception, replacing nuance with narrative. Fans internalize these curated versions as the definitive account of events, even when multiple perspectives exist. Yet these are often derivative of the delayed broadcast feed. Delay also mediates morality and justice. Fans evaluate intent, fairness, and ethics through the lens of replay and commentary. The temporal gap amplifies emotional response, ensuring that perception, rather than lived experience, drives judgment. Athletes navigate reputations, scrutiny, and memory shaped by this mediated perception. On the field, players live raw, immediate reality, navigating consequence, strategy, and human emotion. The seconds of delay, once justified for censorship or safety, have evolved into instruments of narrative power. Understanding this illusion is essential to understanding the modern NFL. Throughout this exploration, it has become increasingly clear that professional football is not experienced equally by all who witness it. Players live each snap, each tackle, each decision in unfiltered immediacy, a reality composed of split-second judgment, physical consequence, and human emotion. Fans, on the other hand, consume a mediated version of this reality, framed, delayed, and curated by seconds of broadcast control. Broadcast delay, once implemented as a technical measure to filter profanity, violence, and unpredictable human behavior, has quietly transformed the emotional DNA of the game. Embedding a temporal gap between experience and perception, between intention and judgment, and between action and narrative. We began our journey in silence, imagining the stadium after the roar fades, contemplating the final season in which a player walks in one type of man and leaves another. In that silence, the true impact of delay emerges. Moments the public believes to be immediate are in fact filtered through seconds of mediation. This subtle, yet powerful temporal adjustment alters perception, reshapes emotion, and constructs the stories that define the sport in the eyes of millions. From the birth of broadcast delay to the modern battle for transparency, each layer of the story reveals how perception is meticulously curated, often at the expense of lived reality. In the earliest days of televised football, networks feared the uncontrolled chaos of the gridiron. Profanity, injury, and conflict that might shock audiences. The seconds of delay, amplified through replay and social media, transformed ephemeral actions into permanent narratives, making reputation both fragile and manipulable. We explored moments where delay saved careers and moments where it destroyed them. A tackle slowed in replay could appear malicious, turning a player into a villain in the eyes of a nation. Conversely, moments of human error, frustration, or heated emotion could be framed sympathetically, softening scrutiny and preserving public esteem. Broadcast delay became a silent arbiter, shaping moral judgment as much as athletic achievement. The seconds separating action and audience perception were never neutral. They were instruments of power, influencing reputation, empathy, and understanding. The interplay of psychology and broadcast delay is equally significant. Slow motion, selective angles, and commentary amplify perception, exaggerating or minimizing intent. Fans interpret moments emotionally and morally, often unaware that the reality experienced by players is fundamentally different. Fans experience football as narrative, as curated story, rather than as immediate, unfiltered competition. Players navigate a landscape in which public perception is largely constructed through mediated moments, where heroism and villainy, fairness and malice are as much products of broadcast timing as athletic action. The temporal gap, invisible yet decisive, reshapes emotion, memory, and understanding across the entire ecosystem of the sport. In reflecting on this journey, the most striking insight is the fragility of trust between audience and game. As we close this exploration, it becomes evident that professional football is a game of dual realities. On the field, players inhabit immediacy, consequence, and physical truth. In the living rooms of millions, audiences inhabit narrative, perception, and mediated emotion. Broadcast delay, a seemingly small technical measure, has grown into a defining force, shaping how fans feel, how players are judged, and how history is written. The seconds between reality and broadcast are small, but their impact is profound. Trust, storytelling, and shared experience are at the core of this dynamic. Every tackle, every touchdown, and every controversial moment is experienced twice. Once in the immediacy of the field and once in the constructed reality of broadcast. The seconds in between define perception, emotion, and memory. They amplify heroism, distort villainy, and shape the cultural narrative of football. Understanding this influence is essential to understanding the sport itself, its psychology, and the profound relationship between athletes and the audiences who watch them. In the end, professional football is both lived and observed, immediate and mediated. The NFL, its players, journalists, and fans exist in a constantly negotiated space between immediacy and perception, action and narrative, reality and broadcast. Delay has transformed the sport into a complex interplay of performance and interpretation. Every second counts, not only on the field, but in shaping how the story is consumed, judged, and remembered. The game has never been just football. It has always been a story, and the seconds of broadcast delay define the frame through which that story is told, understood, and ultimately felt. The hidden currents of delay, narrative framing, and perception continue to shape professional football, reminding us that what we see is rarely all that is. The emotional, cultural, and moral resonance of the sport is mediated by seconds of technology, yet it remains deeply compelling, human, and profoundly connected to the shared imagination of a nation. Football is immediate, delayed, heroic, controversial, and mediated all at once. And in this duality, its story continues, compelling, complex, and never entirely what it seems.